Hey guys, tonight we're headed somewhere lavish, echoing with music and clinking goblets, where the smell of roast meats and honeyed wine floats through pillared courtyards. But where, curiously, the first thing to land on your silver plate is lettuce. Yes, cold, green, slightly wilted lettuce. And you're going to eat it. Happily, in fact. That's because we're slipping back in time to a Roman banquet, somewhere around the 1st century CE. Maybe you're reclining on a velvet cushion next to a half-drunk senator who's reciting bad poetry. Maybe there's a musician nervously tuning his lyre in the corner. Whatever your status, the meal begins with lettuce. It's not optional. You're probably hungry. But fair warning, you probably wouldn't survive this banquet. Between the wine, the fermented sauces, the stuffed dormice, and the entertainment involving flamingos, yes, actual flamingos, you'll need more than lettuce to keep your balance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are, and what part of the world are you listening from? I love hearing about your night routines. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You glance down at the starter course laid out before you. It's not a salad in the modern sense. There's no balsamic vinaigrette, no croutons, and absolutely no cherry tomatoes. Instead, there's a modest pile of lactuca sativa, delicately arranged, garnished perhaps with herbs or a bit of mint. You're reclining on your left side, as etiquette demands, propped up on your elbow. Someone is playing a flute in the background, but you're too focused on the oddity of the whole scene to really listen. Why lettuce? Why not grapes or a warm loaf of bread? The answer, according to ancient Roman beliefs, lies in the vegetable's strange and varied powers. Lettuce, to a Roman diner, wasn't just food. It was almost an ingredient for managing your body's internal weather. Too hot from a bath? Lettuce. Too tired from walking up the Palatine Hill? Lettuce. Worried your upcoming speech in the Senate will make you nervous and sweaty? Better grab a head of lettuce. Maybe two. It's hard to overstate just how seriously Romans took their food. Banquets, especially elite ones, were less about feeding the belly and more about showing off your education, wealth, and self-control. And lettuce, of all things, was considered a kind of starter switch, a way to prepare the stomach for what was to come, or in some cases, calm it down after the storm. This wasn't just a culinary tradition. It was backed by serious food theory. Ancient writers like Pliny the Elder and Cato the Elder insisted that lettuce had cooling, soporific properties. Eat your greens wasn't just something your mom said. It was practically law. Well, not legal law, more like grandma-level pressure, times 1,000. There's even a delightful contradiction that comes up again and again in the literature. Some sources say lettuce wakes you up. Others swear it puts you to sleep. How is that possible? Historians still argue whether the lettuce used at the start of the meal was different from the kind served at the end, or if the timing alone changed its perceived effects. Like an edible mood ring, but leafier. And it wasn't always the soft, butter lettuce you might imagine. Some Roman varieties were bitter, even a little spicy. They were believed to tighten the system, which may or may not be a euphemism for helping with embarrassing digestive issues. You know, the kind that would really ruin the flute solo if they got out of hand. You reach for a leaf. It's tender but firm, with a slightly milky sap at the stem, a detail the Romans paid close attention to. That milky substance was thought to be the source of the plant's power. The word lactuca itself comes from lac, meaning milk. And no, it didn't taste milky, but there was a subtle bitterness there, almost earthy, grounding. Like you were being told, very gently, to stop expecting anything sweet. The sweetness, if it comes at all, will be after the third course, and only if your host likes you. Banquets didn't really start with appetizers the way we understand them today. There was no hors d'oeuvre plate. Instead, lettuce played the role of a gentle prelude, a vegetal overture. It whispered to your insides, "Prepare yourselves. The snails are coming." And beyond its supposed medical properties, lettuce had symbolic weight. It was humble, green, and crisp. A quiet opening note in a dinner designed to crescendo into something wild. Imagine beginning a rock concert with a soft piano intro. That's your lettuce. Soft, grounding, almost apologetically healthy. And while everyone chews politely, because nothing ruins a mood like aggressive chewing, your host might tell a story. Maybe something about how Emperor Augustus once cured his son-in-law's illness with nothing but lettuce. Or how a certain senator fell asleep in his soup because he ate too much of it. Cue polite laughter, very polite, because the man in question might be seated next to you. Still, you chew your lettuce, pretending it's delicious. And oddly, it is. Not because of the flavor, but because of the ritual. You are part of something ancient, absurd, and weirdly cozy. A dinner that begins not with a bang, but with a leaf. The lettuce goes down surprisingly easily, and as you settle back into your cushion, careful not to spill your wine, you notice the conversation shifting. The flute player has switched to a slower melody, and someone just dropped a grape. You try not to stare, but it rolls in a lazy circle before coming to rest near the edge of a servant's sandal. No one picks it up. That grape is now part of the decor. Now, just as you begin to wonder what comes after lettuce, a silver tray arrives. On it, small bits of spiced fish, slices of soft cheese, maybe a few olives coated in oil. These are the gustaccio, the Roman equivalent of appetizers. But you, of course, are still thinking about lettuce, because you're curious, because you're lying here in a tunic, trying not to burp, and lettuce is still lingering in your mind like an unresolved question. Why was lettuce such a big deal? Turns out, the symbolism of lettuce went deeper than dinner. In Roman mythology, lettuce had a dark and slightly ridiculous role to play. The goddess Aphrodite apparently once laid the dead body of her beloved Adonis in a bed of lettuce. Yes, a lettuce bed. Not a flowery bier, not a marble slab. Lettuce. Historians still argue whether this had symbolic meaning about fertility or impotence. Because yes, lettuce was associated with both. Make it make sense. But that's Roman culture for you. Never pick just one meaning when 6 conflicting ones will do. Lettuce also showed up in funeral rites, in gardens dedicated to underworld gods, and in some medical texts as a cure for everything from gout to sore eyes. You'd think lettuce was some kind of vegetable messiah, the way it got passed around every aspect of Roman life. Just imagine being that one smug lettuce farmer, watching your crop become myth, medicine, and mealtime starter all at once. Now, while the guests nibble their olives and slouch more deeply into their embroidered pillows, let's take a peek into one of those sacred Roman gardens. Picture this. Walled-off courtyards in villa backyards, where the air smells like rosemary and damp marble. In one corner, a humble vegetable patch, probably tended by slaves or workers who knew exactly how much sun and water each plant needed. Lettuce was often grown beside onions and cucumbers. These weren't random choices. The Romans believed in food balancing. Lettuce cooled you down, cucumbers soothed the skin, onions were just onions. Not everything was a mystery. One funny thing. Romans sometimes served warm lettuce. They would sauté it lightly in oil or drizzle it with a bit of vinegar and herbs. So if you've ever wilted spinach in a pan and thought you were being fancy, congratulations. You're roughly 2,000 years late to the party. Still reclining, you eye the second course, wondering if more lettuce will appear. The answer? Probably. Some dinners included it in every stage, like a recurring joke no one dares explain. In fact, during the secunda mensa, the dessert course, lettuce might even return as a palate cleanser. Romans weren't afraid of repetition. If it was good for you once, it was good for you 3 times. At this point, you begin to understand something deeper about Roman banquets. They weren't just about eating, they were a full-body event, choreographed like a ballet. From the angle you reclined at to the timing of each course, everything had its place. Even conversation followed structure. Light topics during appetizers, heavier discussions during the main course, and personal gossip saved for dessert. A lettuce leaf in hand was a signal. We begin in calm. And speaking of calm, let's talk lettuce logistics. It had to be picked at the perfect time of day. Early morning, when the sap was thickest. Some growers even whispered to their crops, believing it made the leaves less bitter. Is that true? Who knows? Historians still argue whether ancient horticultural advice was science or superstition. Probably a bit of both. But you have to admire the idea of a man in a toga serenading his lettuce at dawn, whispering sweet nothings in Latin like, "Grow for me, my crunchy darling." Storage wasn't simple either. Without refrigeration, lettuce had to be eaten fresh or kept cool by burying it in damp cloth. That means the crisp leaf you nibbled earlier likely traveled straight from the garden that very morning, carried by a household slave who was hoping the dog didn't try to eat it on the way in. No pressure. Still thinking about that lettuce? Good. That means the Romans succeeded, because this wasn't just about nutrition. It was also about pacing. A banquet could last for hours, stretching from late afternoon until well into the night. You couldn't just show up and start devouring honey-glazed boar without softening the gears first. Lettuce was the polite way to say, "Slow down. There's a stuffed dormouse coming, and it deserves your full attention." You glance again at the musician. He started a piece that sounds like it might be based on bird song. Or maybe it's just the flute pretending to be a bird. Either way, it's oddly soothing. You feel your body settle, lulled by the rhythm of conversation, music, and the gentle whisper of wine being poured into clay cups. And somewhere in the background, a servant clears away a plate. On it, 2 half-eaten leaves of lettuce. You smile. Someone didn't finish theirs. Probably a barbarian. You lean back into your cushion, the embroidered edge tickling your neck, and watch as servants flit between couches like polite bees. The banquet moves to its next gear. Dishes come and go. Tiny dabs of garum, a sprinkle of spelt bread, roasted dormice dressed in poppy seeds, their little paws tucked just so. The lettuce has vanished, but it's still working behind the scenes, calming your stomach, massaging your liver, whispering to your insides, "Don't worry, friend, I've got this." You shift slightly to your left, because reclining right was considered both rude and, depending on the decade, maybe a choking hazard, and reach for a small fig stuffed with pine nuts. It's surprisingly chewy. The wine's been topped up again. Falernian, probably. Or at least the host says it's Falernian. The Roman equivalent of slapping a fancy vineyard label on whatever was nearby and mildly alcoholic. You nod like you're impressed. No one needs to know you once mistook olive brine for wine in the candlelight. It happens. As you chew, someone at your table begins a long-winded story about the emperor's cousin's pet panther. You try to pay attention, but your gaze drifts once again to the garden outside. There, under the fading gold of the afternoon sky, rows of lettuces stand like tiny green soldiers. They're arranged with such care, spaced perfectly apart. The symmetry is hypnotic. The Romans were obsessed with symmetry. It wasn't just aesthetics, it was cosmic order. Gardens were microcosms of the universe, and lettuce? Well, lettuce symbolized balance. Cooling yet fertile, sacred yet edible. A plant that could star in a love story and a medical prescription. Speaking of prescriptions, Roman doctors, those noble practitioners of half-truths and olive oil, prescribed lettuce for nearly everything. Sleepless? Lettuce. Overheated? Lettuce. Moody? Lettuce. They believed it cooled the blood, settled the humors, and, crucially, suppressed unwanted passions. Yes, that's right. Lettuce was considered mildly unsexy. A virtue, depending on who you asked. Historians still argue whether lettuce was feared for its chill or revered for its modesty. Either way, it wasn't the vegetable of choice at wild Saturnalia parties. Imagine the scene. A toga-clad physician named Lucius earnestly advising his patient to eat 3 heads of boiled lettuce before bed. His patient, maybe a politician, nods solemnly, then promptly chokes down the soggy mess and dreams of running from sheep in sandals. You wonder how much of Roman medicine was just aggressive guesswork wrapped in garlic. But let's not wander too far from the banquet table. The second course is hitting its stride now, the prima mensa. This is where the real bragging rights begin. Dishes of exotic origin are being paraded. Flamingo tongue, sea urchin eggs, maybe even a stuffed peacock if the host is particularly insecure. You poke at something gelatinous and unidentifiable. It jiggles. You don't ask questions. And in between all of this, more lettuce. Not full salads, mind you. That wasn't quite their style. But little wedges appear here and there, tucked beside fish, woven into stews, rolled around minced meat like a sleepy cabbage. It's subtle, but it's constant. Lettuce has become the baseline of this feast. Unnoticed, yet holding everything together. A man 2 couches over starts reciting a poem. Something about spring, or lost love, or his neighbor's exceptionally well-manicured beard. It's hard to tell with all the metaphors. The crowd hums with polite approval. Someone claps, a server trips, a plate breaks, no one blinks. You sip your wine. It tastes vaguely of raisins and forgotten promises. Now let's talk lettuce varieties. The Romans didn't have just one kind. Oh no, they grew several, including one known as Lactuca sativa, which you might recognize as the great-great-great ancestor of modern butterhead lettuce. Another popular one was more bitter, used mainly for medicinal broths. One variety, scribbled in the notes of Pliny the Elder, was so bitter that even goats turned up their noses at it. Which means, presumably, that some poor soul had to test that personally. You picture a toga-wearing man offering lettuce to a goat, waiting patiently for rejection, and then jotting it down like a scientific breakthrough. Historians still argue whether these early lettuce cultivars were domesticated for taste, texture, or pure stubborn Roman pride. But it's clear they had preferences. Some were grown long and spindly for easier boiling, others round and tightly leafed for decorative centerpieces. Yes, lettuce centerpieces. Rome had opinions about dinner table flair, and flair mattered. A banquet wasn't just food. It was politics, power, theater. Who reclined closest to the host, who brought the best wine, who had the most delightful conversational diversions. Every detail was a statement. Even the lettuce said something. I am cultured, I am health conscious. I can afford fresh greens in July. Now imagine being the guest who doesn't eat his lettuce. The scandal. You'd risk being labeled uncouth, unrefined, or worse. Greek. You set down your fig and chuckle quietly. The man beside you, maybe named Gaius, they're always named Gaius, leans over and offers you a bite of something wrapped in fig leaf. You nod graciously. It's delicious. You lie and say it reminds you of your mother's cooking. Everyone laughs politely. The joke? You never knew your mother. That's the kind of banquet humor Romans appreciated. Oddly tragic, slightly strange, deeply edible. As the shadows stretch across the tiled floor and the candles start to flicker, your stomach finally understands what's happening. You're not eating a meal. You're participating in a ritual, a lettuce-laced, wine-drenched, gold-tinged ritual of excess. And like all rituals, it has its stages, its pace, its sacred symbols. And lettuce, humble, leafy, slightly medicinal lettuce, is one of them. You recline just a little deeper into the soft pile of cushions, your belly now entering that delicate state of Roman fullness, somewhere between satisfied and mildly panicked. And yet, somehow, the food keeps coming. The servers are relentless, gliding about in well-rehearsed loops with trays of delicacies, their expressions frozen in the half-smile of a person who's been politely holding in judgment for several hours. You idly reach for a cluster of grapes, but your fingers brush a familiar leaf instead. Ah yes, another sprig of lettuce. It's not flashy. It's not drenched in honey or spiced wine reduction. It's just there, doing its job, soothing your digestion, nudging the next course gently down the Roman intestinal highway. Lettuce wasn't merely a food in ancient Rome. It was a quiet companion, the kind you'd never introduce at parties, but always hoped would show up anyway. Cato the Elder, that famously cranky senator with a deep distrust of fun, once wrote about the value of lettuce in his agricultural manual. He considered it a staple, reliable, virtuous, and not likely to throw wild orgies behind the villa. Unlike, say, fermented fish paste, the banquet rolls onward, shifting from opulent seafoods to heavier meats. A boar's head glistens at the center of the table, its eyes replaced by something that might be olives, or possibly very unfortunate dates. You take a small slice, just enough to participate in the pageantry. As the flavors hit your tongue, smoky, herbal, bizarrely sweet, you feel a pang of appreciation for the earlier lettuce. And then, of course, there's the burping. Yes, burping. Because in a Roman banquet, letting out a discreet belch wasn't rude, it was encouraged. A sign that the host had fed you well, that the gods were pleased, and that your stomach was actively engaged in heroic acts of digestion. Historians still argue whether this burping etiquette was truly widespread or simply something Seneca complained about once, but the idea endures. Now, as the meat course settles into the warm, lamplit atmosphere, your mind begins to wander. Always a dangerous thing at a Roman feast, where too much thought can lead you to some very strange places, like lettuce mythology. You see, the Romans didn't invent the lettuce obsession. They inherited it, like a family heirloom passed down from the Egyptians and Greeks. And it was the Egyptians, bless them, who had some particularly intense views on the humble head of lettuce. In ancient Egypt, lettuce was sacred to Min, a fertility god who was, how do we put this, very enthusiastic about his duties. Lettuce, which stood upright and exuded a milky white sap when cut, was considered, well, you can fill in the metaphor. The symbolism was not subtle. It was believed to stimulate fertility, virility, and all sorts of saucy behavior. So naturally, the Egyptians cultivated it with deep reverence. The Greeks, on the other hand, took a colder view. By the time lettuce hit Hellenic soil, it was seen less as a fertility booster and more as a sedative. They noticed its effects on sleep and digestion and decided it belonged at the end of a meal, like nature's peppermint tea. But this created some confusion, because they also linked lettuce to death. Yes, death. There was a myth about Adonis, Aphrodite's beautiful, ill-fated mortal lover, bleeding out into a bed of lettuce. As the story goes, he was gored by a wild boar, and the goddess laid his body among the plants. Lettuce became a symbol of tragic love, wilting beauty, and funerary offerings. The Greeks began planting it in graveyards. And so, what began as a proud symbol of virility in Egypt became, in Greece, a sad salad of sorrow. The Romans, ever the synthesizers, borrowed both interpretations. For them, lettuce was at once medicinal and melancholic, a plant that straddled the line between life-giving and life-ending. Eat it for calmness. Offer it at funerals. Use it to fall asleep. But don't fall too far. As you chew another leaf, because yes, another lettuce has appeared, you reflect on how something so quiet, so unassuming, could carry such weight across empires. A garnish, but also a godsend. Your host, clearly proud of their spread, gestures toward a silver tray stacked with pickled vegetables, artfully arranged in spirals. At the center, of course, a rosette made from carved lettuce leaves. You can't help but admire the effort. Someone in the kitchen has painstakingly transformed lettuce into art, just to be devoured and forgotten 10 minutes later. It's peak Roman extravagance, the appearance of simplicity elevated to unnecessary complexity, and then consumed without comment. A whisper of conversation floats past your ear, someone arguing that the lettuce is better raw, someone else declaring it's best boiled with vinegar and cumin. The great Roman lettuce debate lives on. Pliny the Elder once devoted several paragraphs to lettuce preparation, insisting on rubbing it with salt before serving. Others preferred it boiled into near oblivion, like a vegetable that had wronged them personally. Historians still argue whether these methods were culinary genius or just pre-refrigeration desperation. Either way, you find yourself slowly chewing a bit of salt-rubbed leaf, nodding along as if you've always had strong opinions about vegetal texture. You glance around the room. The torches flicker now, casting long shadows on the mosaic floors. Somewhere, a lyre is being plucked with professional laziness. The singer hasn't shown up yet. Probably stuck rehearsing some tragically mispronounced Greek epic in the garden. You take another sip of wine and find yourself idly wondering, when did lettuce stop being this important? At what point in history did it go from centerpiece to side salad? From symbol of balance and digestion to, well, grocery aisle afterthought? But you don't need an answer right now. For now, you're here, in this strange and splendid moment, reclining with the Romans, letting lettuce lull you through the heaviest part of the evening. By now, the wine has started to work its slow magic on your limbs, softening your edges and making the world tilt ever so slightly. Like a fresco that's not quite level, but still charming in its own crooked way. The servers glide about in careful rhythm, their movements like choreography you're not supposed to notice. You pick up a fig, bite into it, and immediately understand why Romans couldn't stop writing poems about fruit. It's sweet, sticky, and vaguely scandalous. A murmur rises from across the triclinium. Someone's recounting the banquet where Emperor Claudius supposedly demanded that every dish include at least one type of lettuce. Was it true? Historians still argue whether this was an exaggeration born from senatorial gossip, or if Claudius simply believed too deeply in lettuce's digestive virtues. You recline further, your mind drifting to the Romans' obsession with balance, not just in politics or architecture, but in the body. Roman medical theory was steeped in humoral science. The idea that your health hinged on the balance of 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much of anyone, and you were out of sync. Too melancholic? Perhaps you needed some light vegetables. Too choleric? Better avoid anything spicy. Lettuce, cool and moist by nature, was believed to temper the body's fire, making it perfect for balancing overly rich meals. And this meal? Oh, it's rich. A riot of tastes, textures, and smells. There's dormice stuffed with nuts and herbs, served in tiny ceramic bowls that look like they were made for a doll's kitchen. There's fish layered with fermented sauces so potent they'd probably be classified as chemical weapons today. You try a bite of each, and then another of that trusty lettuce. The leaf doesn't judge. It just helps. In the background, a philosopher begins lecturing about the virtues of self-restraint. This, while casually downing his sixth honeyed date. You can't help but smile. Moderation in theory, indulgence in practice. That's Rome for you. Now someone's quoting Pliny the Elder again. His opinions are everywhere tonight, like a particularly verbose dinner guest who refuses to be wrong. Pliny once catalogued over a dozen varieties of lettuce, describing their textures, medicinal effects, and ideal growing conditions. There was the Cappadocian lettuce, supposedly bitter and hardy, the Latin variety, sweet and soft, and the wild sort, best boiled and served with vinegar to dull its edge. It's hard not to picture Pliny scribbling furiously in his garden, slightly sunburned, hunched over a salad. It's getting late, though the concept of late means little in a Roman banquet. Time is fluid here, measured not in hours, but in courses. You find yourself half listening to a tale about Caligula's midnight feasts, where guests were roused from bed just to sit through an impromptu banquet. Whether that included lettuce is unclear, but somehow you suspect it made an appearance, perhaps as garnish, perhaps as a gentle reminder that even emperors need to digest. Your eyes wander to the floor mosaics, cool underfoot, depicting grapevines and reclining gods. Someone's sandal squeaks softly as they shift on the polished stone. The scent of spiced lamb still lingers in the air, clinging to the folds of your tunic like an aromatic memory. One of the younger guests is whispering about his grandmother's remedy for sleeplessness, lettuce tea. Just boil a few leaves, steep them, and drink. Not exactly the kind of brew you'd serve at a tavern, but surprisingly effective. Lettuce contains lactucarium, a milky fluid sometimes called lettuce opium, not because it gets you high, but because it gently coaxes you toward sleep. So naturally, the Romans started using it for everything from calming nerves to quieting colicky babies. Some ancient recipes even suggest mixing lettuce sap with wine for maximum drowsiness. It's the sleepy time cocktail you didn't know you needed. There's a soft clatter as a plate is replaced, and suddenly, dessert appears. Not in the sense you expect, but in the Roman sense. No cakes or pastries here. Instead, bowls of fresh fruit, cheeses, and a surprising number of lettuce garnishes. You bite into a wedge of cheese and chase it with, yes, another lettuce leaf. And it works. The bitterness offsets the richness. It's like someone snuck a spa treatment into your mouth. Then, a bard begins to sing. The tune is slow, a lilting melody that rises and falls like gentle surf. The words are in Latin, but the rhythm is universal. A lullaby woven from wine and oil lamps and warm company. The night folds in on itself, cozy and timeless. You find yourself thinking about the Roman countryside. Rolling hills dotted with villas, vineyards curling like ribbons, and in the garden, always, a patch of lettuce. Grown not just for meals, but for medicine, for rituals, even for decoration. Some Roman households used lettuce in wedding ceremonies, placing it on the nuptial bed as a symbol of fertility and tranquility. A strange combination, but then again, the Romans were full of contradictions. You lean back and let out a small sigh, your breath joining the collective exhale of guests settling into post-prandial stupor. The banquet has moved into that final sacred phase. When conversation quiets, the fire burns lower, and even the philosophers begin to yawn. And as your fingers trace the curve of your goblet, you think, maybe the Romans were onto something. Maybe lettuce isn't just for rabbits and sad lunchboxes. Maybe, in the right context, it's a gateway to balance, to serenity, to sleep. You sit quietly now, in the aftermath of decadence. The scent of roasted fennel still floats in the air, softening slowly like a dying ember. Around you, guests slump a little more into their cushions, the energy in the room slipping gently from exuberant to drowsy. A server pads by with a pitcher of watered wine, and you hold out your cup, though more out of ritual than thirst. The real feast is over. What remains is the winding down. Across the table, someone's recounting the myth of Minerva's lettuce garden. You're not sure if this version is authentic or a wine-fueled invention, but the story goes that the goddess of wisdom had a private patch of lettuce she used to calm her nerves after arguments with Jupiter. Whether true or not, it fits the evening's mood. A little silly, a little reverent, and just credible enough to make you wonder. Now your thoughts drift to the Roman idea of otium, a concept loosely translated as leisure. But more than that, it meant thoughtful idleness. Otium was prized by philosophers and poets, those who believed in the art of stillness. The opposite of the stress and bustle of negotium. Business. Lettuce, of course, fits perfectly into a life of otium. It's a soft food, a thinking person's food. It doesn't scream or crunch. It whispers and yields. It invites quiet. And maybe that's the secret to why it made its way into so many banquets. The lamps flicker slightly. One of the guests is fanning himself with a piece of parchment, not for the heat, but because he's bored in the most luxurious way. You shift, adjusting the cushion beneath your elbow, and catch yourself doing what many Roman diners did at this hour, simply watching the flames dance in the oil lamps. Hypnotic, meditative, slightly melancholic, but in a good way. A soft burp breaks the silence, and no one reacts. Romans considered it a compliment to the chef. In fact, trying not to burp after a feast might be seen as rude, or at least ungrateful. One of the older men begins reciting a short poem about lettuce from a minor poet, possibly Catius or Varro, comparing its gentle crunch to the whisper of a lover's footstep. It's charming, in a leafy kind of way. Then someone mentions Emperor Augustus again, particularly his habit of eating lettuce before bed. According to Suetonius, who never missed a chance to make his emperors look eccentric, Augustus once cured a bout of serious insomnia by adding more lettuce to his diet. Historians still argue whether this is a stretch of herbal mythology or just good digestion, helping a tired emperor sleep better. Either way, it's a comforting detail. The most powerful man in the empire, tucking into a salad for his dreams. In the periphery, a pair of musicians begins to play a quiet duet. Flute and lyre, their sounds weaving through the room like gentle vines. The notes echo just enough to feel like they're coming from inside your head. Your fingers stroke the rim of your goblet again, tracing lazy circles, letting the music settle somewhere behind your eyes. The banquet now feels less like an event and more like a shared sigh. This was the goal all along, wasn't it? Not to impress or dazzle, but to descend slowly into collective stillness. Every bite of lettuce, every sip of wine, was a gentle slope down into this moment. This warm hush filled with music and breath. You glance at a nearby plate, now down to a few scattered leaves and a half-eaten fig. The lettuce remains unwilted, fresh-looking even after hours. Roman kitchens took pride in serving it crisp, using bowls filled with cool water to preserve the texture. Some chefs even sprinkled snow over their greens, imported at enormous cost from distant mountains just to keep things fresh for the palate. A frivolous detail, but so very Roman. Someone speaks, slowly and dreamily, about the Villa of Poppaea at Oplontis. The frescoes there, they say, include detailed renderings of gardens, leaves, vines, even what looks suspiciously like lettuce. Whether that's true or just wishful thinking is up for debate. But it makes sense. The Romans loved bringing the outdoors inside. Their homes were filled with painted plants, carved grapes, and mosaic flowers. A kind of nature you didn't have to weed or water. The lettuce in your bowl might have a twin on the wall. By now your legs have gone soft under you. The wine hums gently in your chest, You can feel yourself slipping toward something. Sleep, maybe. Or a dream shaped like a Roman garden, one with colonnades and fountains and endless rows of leafy greens. A space built not for efficiency, but for wandering thought, for walking slowly, for gazing and maybe reciting poetry to a shrub. Someone chuckles as another guest tries to stand and fails spectacularly. No one helps right away. There's no urgency here. Eventually, a servant eases him back onto his cushion with a small smile, as though saying, "Not yet. Stay a little longer." And you do. You sit back. You close your eyes just briefly. You imagine the city outside, Rome, ever bustling, but muffled now by distance and the thickness of these walls. You imagine a garden behind the house, shadowy under moonlight, the lettuce glistening faintly with dew. Maybe a small cat prowls between the rows. Maybe not. Either way, the garden is still, and it waits. Back inside, someone begins humming. It's not a tune, you know, but it doesn't matter. The sound lulls you further. You think again of that odd Roman belief, that lettuce had both soporific and aphrodisiac properties. Two completely opposing effects, bundled into one unassuming plant. Maybe that's why they served it at every banquet. Not just to help you sleep, but to remind you that opposites can coexist peacefully. Sweet and bitter, hot and cold, laughter and silence, wakefulness and dreams. The banquet is quiet now. Most of the guests are reclining at obtuse angles that suggest they are full, content, and maybe just a little bit confused about where their limbs are. You stretch your legs slowly, feeling the embroidered hem of your tunic slide against the cool marble floor, and your thoughts drift, as they do at this point in a Roman evening, from food to philosophy. Naturally, somewhere near the head of the table, a younger guest launches into a sleepy, half-hearted debate about whether lettuce is hot or cold in nature. You'd laugh, except that this is actually a real Roman concern. The whole system of ancient dietary thought revolves around the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and their associated qualities: hot, cold, moist, dry. The lettuce, it seems, was firmly on team cold and moist. Good for calming the passions, they said. Good for the blood. You glance at the bowl beside you. The leaves are pale green, almost silver in the lamplight. If they had a personality, it would be quietly helpful. Like the friend who always brings snacks but never asks for anything in return. And according to Galen, the 2nd century physician whose medical opinions were basically Roman law, lettuce was one of the few foods universally beneficial. It soothed the stomach, cooled the liver, and prepped the body for sleep. Unless, of course, it was the wild kind, which apparently had a bitterness that could ruin your whole evening. The person next to you snorts softly, waking themselves up. You catch them mid-mumble, something about lettuce also being used for baldness. You blink. Baldness? Really? But yes, it's true. Some ancient Roman remedies recommended crushed lettuce leaves, rubbed on the scalp to promote hair growth. Historians still argue whether this was actual medicine or just the ancient version of a beauty blog gone rogue. Your thoughts drift to Roman kitchen gardens, horti, as they were called. These were the pride of many elite households, sometimes even more admired than the house itself. Some were neatly organized, symmetrical marvels of order. Others were sprawling and fragrant, with a mix of herbs, vegetables, and flowers. Lettuce was a staple. It grew easily, and you could stagger the planting to have a steady supply all year long. Not quite fast food, but efficient in its own leafy way. Outside, you imagine a kitchen slave plucking lettuce in the early morning, breath misting slightly in the winter chill, the leaves dew-speckled and faintly bitter with the cold. He carries them in a woven basket to the cook, who will soak them in water scented with mint and vinegar to keep them crisp until evening. This is a routine repeated thousands of times across the empire, anonymous, uncelebrated, and yet foundational. Empires are built on this kind of quiet choreography. The man across from you scratches his ear with the stem of a fig leaf and begins to speak about lettuce again, this time its role in funeral feasts. And suddenly, everything goes just a little colder. Because yes, lettuce wasn't only for leisure. It also showed up in rituals of mourning. In some Roman traditions, lettuce symbolized death's chill embrace. Served during funeral banquets, it was a gentle reminder that life wilts too. Just like a leaf left too long in the sun. But don't worry, you're not at that kind of dinner. Tonight is more about the living than the dead. Still, the presence of lettuce in both celebrations and funerals is telling. The Romans loved their symbolism. A green leaf could mean freshness, peace, even divine approval. Or it could whisper of endings, of silence, of the slow fade from vitality to rest. You shift a little and feel your elbow brush against the edge of the table. A thin slice of cheese has melted just enough to glue itself to the platter. Someone's left a half-eaten olive next to it, as if staging a minimalist still life for future archaeologists. You smile sleepily at the idea of someone in 2,000 years unearthing this exact scene and writing an entire thesis about the cheese-olive dynamic. Soft laughter bubbles around you again. Someone told a joke about Cato the Elder, the famously grumpy statesman who once said that lettuce was the only plant worth growing. He claimed it cured everything from stomach pain to melancholy. Some say he even ate it raw, roots and all, like some kind of grim Roman rabbit. Whether that's true or not is questionable, but it's certainly in character. The man once tried to turn cabbage into a universal medicine, after all. At the edge of the atrium, you notice the household's mosaic floor glinting in the lamplight. Tiny tesserae forming scenes of hunting, feasting, and agriculture. You focus on one in particular, a reclining man holding a bunch of something leafy. Lettuce? Maybe. Or maybe it's parsley, or dill. It's hard to tell, but you decide it's lettuce for tonight. It feels right. Even the floor is participating in the theme. By now, the musicians have packed up, or perhaps they've just nodded off with their instruments in hand. The air is still. You can hear the faint splash of water from the courtyard fountain, and your eyes, oh, your eyes are heavier than lead, heavier than the amphorae that held the oil for tonight's lamps. And in this moment, surrounded by the last flickers of firelight and the faint smell of fennel and vinegar, it strikes you. The Romans weren't just obsessed with control and power, they were deeply invested in the art of winding down, of ending things well. Their banquets were carefully choreographed lullabies for the senses, a progression from hunger to satiety to dreams. And lettuce? Lettuce was the signal, the edible punctuation mark that told everyone, "We're done now, let's rest." A quiet breeze stirs the curtains as you recline deeper into your corner of the triclinium. The torchlight flickers. You're vaguely aware of someone pouring what must be the final cup of diluted wine, and your thoughts swirl gently toward the more delicate mechanics of digestion. Because here's something they never told you in school. Roman banquets didn't just end with lettuce. Sometimes they ended with a lettuce exit strategy. Yes, tonight we enter the softly whispered world of Roman digestion rituals. Not exactly glamorous, but oh so central to the entire banquet experience. You see, lettuce wasn't just a starter to calm the stomach or a poetic metaphor at funerals. It was also a post-feast hero. Romans believed that munching a few tender leaves at the end of a heavy meal could close the stomach, sort of like drawing the curtains after a play. The logic was simple. Lettuce helped soothe overindulgence. After courses of honeyed dormice, sizzling sausages, and fish sauce-drizzled mystery meat, something had to restore a sense of gentle order in the belly. And lettuce, cool and demure, was just the ticket. You imagine it slowly working its way through a senator's digestive tract, patting down the embers of excessive wine and whatever unfortunate mollusk he just swallowed whole. Now, here's the best part. Some Romans believed that this digestive peacekeeper was so effective, it could actually induce sleep. That's right. Lettuce, the world's least exciting vegetable, was Rome's answer to melatonin. Pliny the Elder, never one to shy away from an elaborate claim, suggested that lettuce made you sleepy and more virtuous. If you'd like to test that theory, by all means, help yourself to another bite. What makes all this more fascinating is that the lettuce as sleep aid idea didn't vanish with Rome. Medieval herbalists and early modern doctors continued this lettuce love affair. Some apothecaries even distilled it into syrup. The 18th century gave us lactucarium, a kind of lettuce opium scraped from the milky sap of wild lettuce leaves. It was advertised to calm nerves, settle children, and, in some cases, cure melancholy. Historians still argue whether these remedies did anything more than provide a very mild placebo effect, but the belief endured. And then there's the lettuce lamp. You heard that right. In some folk practices, well into the early 19th century, placing a bowl of lettuce on your bedside table was supposed to ward off nightmares. Picture it. A solitary lettuce, glowing softly in the dark, like a vegetal nightlight. You can't help but chuckle at the image. Somewhere, a Roman ghost is nodding in approval. Back in the triclinium, the wine cups are finally empty, and the air is thick with the sighs of the very full. One guest lets out a quiet hiccup and murmurs something about dreaming of Bacchus. Another reaches lazily for a fig, misses entirely, and falls asleep with their hand still mid-air. A cat pads silently across the mosaic floor, eyeing a bit of stray sausage. The banquet is unraveling. Softly, slowly, just as it should. You begin to notice the servants again, moving quietly, clearing dishes with the grace of people who've done this 1,000 times. One of them places a fresh bowl of water, infused with rose petals, beside a reclining matron, who dips her fingers in without opening her eyes. Another carries a tray of fresh lettuce, now served cold and crisp, flecked with a drizzle of vinegar and a pinch of salt. The silence deepens, broken only by the faint crunch of a few half-hearted chewers, still giving their stomachs one last olive branch. This final lettuce course isn't just about digestion, it's ritual, a kind of edible punctuation mark, signaling that it's time to let go, that the music has faded, the politics have paused, and even Cicero's ghost would now kindly shut up. You stretch ever so slightly, and think about how meticulous the Romans were about endings. They didn't rush them. No Irish exits here. The lettuce was the Roman good night, as if to say, we've feasted, we've gossiped, we've philosophized. Now let the lettuce guide you toward dreams. The flickering torchlight paints shadows on the frescoed walls. Scenes of garden gods and dancing nymphs sway gently with every gust of the cooling air. And you find yourself wondering if lettuce ever made it into the mythology books. Probably not. But it's had a strangely persistent career, equal parts salad, sedative, and social cue. And then, of course, there's the comedy. Roman playwrights loved to joke about overindulgence, and lettuce found its way into more than a few punchlines. He ate so much they had to roll him out like a barrel, and still he asked for lettuce. That sort of thing. Mild humor, but soothing in its predictability. Just the kind of joke you could hear repeated 100 times, and still chuckle sleepily. You glance once more at the cooling dish beside you. The lettuce leaves are slightly wilted now, their edges curled like parchment left in the sun. It doesn't matter. They've done their job. Eased the fullness, softened the evening, prepared the mind for silence. You lie back on your cushion, eyes half-lidded, and let your thoughts float, just a little, beyond the present. And in this half-dreaming moment, you feel it. The strange, unlikely truth that something as humble as a lettuce leaf could carry within it the secret rhythm of a culture. Not just food, not just medicine, but ritual, repetition, closure, a final bite, a final breath. The feast is ending. The torchlight dims a little more, and the soft clink of bronze bowls being stacked carries gently across the atrium. You're still in your lounging pose, reclining like a true Roman elite who survived another banquet, and quite a bit of lettuce. But don't sit up just yet. We're about to meander into the post-banquet rituals, which are, in their own way, just as bizarrely choreographed as the feast itself. You see, Romans didn't just eat until they were full. They dined until they were transformed, spiritually, socially, and, in some cases, philosophically. A banquet wasn't complete until you had properly digested the experience of eating. And so, the post-prandial period included a slew of gentle rituals, quiet music, personal reflection, maybe even a quick poem recitation about the virtues of cabbage, or naturally, lettuce. This wasn't only about being fancy. Romans believed that how you ended a meal said something about your character. An elegant exit? Refined? Slamming down a wine cup and muttering about your bad back? Barbaric. So they eased their way out with intention. One favorite post-meal activity was the perfuming of hands and hair. Imagine an attendant wafting toward you with a delicate vessel of saffron oil or rose water, gently massaging your fingers as if you were royalty, which technically you kind of are, at least in your own little dream palace. The smell rises softly around you. It's not strong, just enough to lift the oily scent of roast pork off your skin and replace it with something gentler, sleepier. After the scents came the sound. Enter the flute girl or the lyre boy, depending on the host's budget and musical preferences. Light melodies floated through the air, mixing with the incense and the murmurs of now drowsy guests. The music wasn't for dancing. It was for digesting. A sonic, soft landing. Some evenings, the host would read a short passage from a Stoic philosopher, something thoughtful, like Seneca warning about the dangers of ambition, or Epictetus reminding you that control is an illusion. Cheery stuff, really. But when delivered in a sleepy tone and between spoonfuls of fig compote, it hit just right. The Romans liked to think. They also liked to nap. And they rarely saw a reason the two couldn't overlap. Now, not every post-banquet moment was dignified. Occasionally, someone would doze off in the garden and wake up with a chicken sitting on them. It happened. Or a guest might become so moved by a song or a poem that they'd launch into their own impromptu performance, often with questionable results. A senator once insisted on singing about olives for 40 minutes. No one stopped him. That was considered rude. You simply waited it out and hoped the lettuce would kick in soon. There was also the matter of the vomitorium. Ah yes, the infamous myth. Despite what late-night trivia might suggest, the Romans didn't actually design special rooms for vomiting mid-feast. The word vomitorium referred to a passageway in amphitheaters where crowds could spew in and out quickly. Think crowd flow, not digestive overflow. Historians still argue whether some elite feasts included discreet purging to make room for more food, but the term itself? Pure 19th century misunderstanding. Or, more likely, a Victorian joke taken far too seriously. Still, the concept has hung around like a garlic burp. And in some obscure corners of Roman literature, there are hints that a few extreme diners might have taken steps to reset the system mid-meal. Whether by sticking fingers down throats or other dubious means, we'll never know for sure. But most Romans were more refined. Lettuce, remember? Not lurching behind a column. Once the music faded and the belly settled, it was time for the guests to drift out. Slowly, like fog rolling off a hilltop. Some lingered in the courtyard to gaze at the stars. Others stayed behind, helping themselves to a final cup of watered-down wine, while discussing the finer points of architecture or whether cabbage was better than lettuce. These debates could go on for hours, quietly, sleepily, without urgency. The host would remain in his reclining position, nodding graciously, even if his eyes were already half closed. One servant would bring him slippers. Another would offer a warm cloth for the forehead. Part comfort, part signal that the evening was truly done. And then, the final curtain. The extinguishing of the lamps. One by one, small flames were pinched out, their smoke curling upward in soft spirals. The room dimmed, cooled, exhaled. All that remained was the sound of sandals brushing the mosaic, fading voices, and the faint rustle of leaves in the peristyle garden. You stay just a little longer, letting it all soak in. The rituals, the pacing, the quiet respect for digestion, not just of food, but of the entire experience. And through it all, lettuce remains the quiet hero. Not flashy, not poetic, just dependable, cool, grounded, the leafy lullaby of the Roman elite. And as you lie there, somewhere between history and sleep, a strange little question flutters across your mind. What will you eat before bed tomorrow night? Maybe not lettuce, but perhaps you'll give it a nod. A sleepy little tribute to the vegetable that knew how to end an evening. You stretch slightly, just enough to shift on your side without disturbing the invisible toga you've been imagining draped over your sleepy limbs. The feast is over. The torches are out. And now it's morning in the Roman world. But not just any morning. You've stayed the night, like a favored guest or a cousin from out of town who no one had the heart to kick out. And with the sun slinking over tiled rooftops, it's time to peek behind the curtain of what came after a big Roman banquet. Because here's the thing. Lettuce might have been eaten in moonlight, but it had consequences in daylight. Romans weren't particularly fond of subtlety when it came to discussing digestion. In fact, they were surprisingly open about the whole process. As the cook used to say, what goes down must eventually go out. You wake up feeling groggy but oddly proud. You survived an evening of overindulgence, satire recitations, and perhaps a touch too much garum. And now, wrapped in a borrowed woolen cloak and shuffling past a marble bust of someone's moody grandfather, you make your way to one of the less glamorous but deeply essential parts of Roman life. The toilet. Roman latrines were communal, echoey, and surprisingly chatty. They often consisted of long benches with strategically spaced holes and no privacy to speak of. Just you, your fellow diners, and an open sewer channel humming beneath your sandals. And lettuce? Oh yes, it was believed to make this morning ritual much smoother. The somniferous quality that helped you sleep also did double duty on the digestive front. Talk about multitasking. You'd sit with a sponge on a stick nearby, dunked in vinegar between uses, and possibly engage in some light conversation while you went about your business. Historians still argue whether this setup was truly hygienic, or if people simply developed robust immune systems out of sheer necessity. Probably a bit of both. But there's something endearingly practical about it all. No shame, just process. Now, once your affairs are handled, and your sandals strapped on tight, it's time to head to the forum or maybe the baths. depending on your social calendar and your hangover. For many Romans, especially the wealthier sort, the morning after ritual included a visit to the thermae, where steam, scraping, and gossip flowed in equal measure. You're greeted by warm marble, echoed footsteps, and the scent of oils and herbs. The bath attendant, or capsarius, offers a bit of oil to rub on your arms before scraping it off again with a curved tool called a strigil. You look like a glistening olive, then a polished amphora, and finally, a freshly cleaned human. Lettuce doesn't leave its mark, it seems. It just whispers through the bloodstream, doing its quiet work. It was at these baths that people debriefed from banquets. Did you hear what Marcus said about the fish sauce? Was that really a stuffed dormouse or just a fig in disguise? I swear I dreamed about cabbage dancing in a tunic. These were the gentle echoes of post-lettuce living, but not everyone looked back fondly. There were a few lettuce deniers, people who believed the leafy green had too much of a soporific effect, made them drowsy in meetings, dulled their wit, or simply caused dreams too strange to explain. The poet Martial once sniped that lettuce made him feel like a marble slab. Interpret that however you like. Still, among the more practically minded Romans, lettuce was seen as a sort of medicinal neutral, neither bold nor intrusive, a leafy truce in the stomach. And if your feast had gotten a bit too raucous, say, if someone recited Virgil with their toga on backwards, lettuce was there to restore the cosmic balance. After the baths, perhaps a short stroll past the temples. Maybe you buy a honey cake from a vendor or nod respectfully to a senator who definitely doesn't remember your name. The sun rises higher. You're starting to feel normal again. Lettuce has done its job. And you wonder, what if you hosted the next banquet? Would you serve 3 kinds of lettuce? Would you quote Hippocrates between courses? Would your vomitorium be metaphorical, architectural, or just non-existent? But for now, it's enough to enjoy the simple aftermath. The hush of the colonnades, the soft swish of robes, the odd rooster that seems to be arguing with a potted fern. Life returns to its usual pace, and the remnants of the night before are slowly absorbed into the flow of the city. Conversations quiet down. Smells fade. The memory of that flute melody? Fainter than ever, but still hovering in your ears. And as you wander back through the narrow alleys, past fig vendors and sleepy-eyed money changers, one final thought drifts through your lettuce-slowed mind. How did they really figure all this out? Trial and error? A bored doctor with a salad obsession? Or perhaps it was just one groggy Roman who one day whispered, "You know what? I sleep better after lettuce." And the world never looked back. You shuffle past a mosaic-tiled floor glinting in the mid-morning sun, still pondering lettuce's sleepy powers, and how this humble leaf came to anchor an empire's dining logic. But before you sink into too much philosophical introspection, someone hands you a scroll. Not metaphorically, an actual wax tablet, still warm from being carried under an armpit. It's a menu. Roman banquet menus weren't fixed like modern restaurants, but for special occasions, like Saturnalia, weddings, or political showboating, they were grand productions. The lettuce wasn't a standalone item. It was the opening act in a lineup that might have included things like flamingo tongue, roasted dormice, eel soaked in spices, and peacocks arranged in dramatic, feather-forward poses. But back to that lettuce. You peek at the first course, scrawled in looping letters, Lactuca viridis, cum oxymeli. That's green lettuce, served with a sweet-sour dressing made from honey and vinegar. It's cool, astringent, and designed to open the stomach. Which is ironic, considering what the next 6 courses are going to do to it. The belief was that lettuce, consumed first, could either stimulate hunger, or, if taken at the end, settle the stomach for sleep. Yes, the same leaf was considered both an appetizer and a sedative. Historians still argue whether this dual use was purely anecdotal or whether different lettuce varieties had differing effects. Did wild lettuce pack more of a punch than your average garden kind? Maybe. Or maybe it was all psychological. Green equals clean, so your gut believes it. You rub a thumb over the waxy list of dishes, noting how the Romans didn't shy away from contrast. A course of garlicky sausage might be followed by spiced fruit, then a stew of oysters and pepper. Your stomach doesn't know whether to rebel or applaud, and yet all of it has a place. Just as senators bickered beneath marble arches and poets made sly jabs at each other's footwear, food was a layered performance. Every bite had purpose, even the lettuce, especially the lettuce. It framed the meal, gave it structure, like a salad-scented prologue and epilogue. You trace back the idea that certain foods had humoral effects. That is, they could shift the balance of the four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Lettuce, according to Galenic medicine, was cooling and moist, perfect for an overheated temperament. Just don't give it to a melancholic soul, lest they drift off entirely during the goat cheese course. And it's not just about what's served, it's when. Banquets typically started at the 9th hour, around 3 p.m., and rolled straight into evening. So if lettuce was meant to sedate or soothe, it needed to be timed just right. Too early, and you risked dozing off mid-toast. Too late, and you'd still be digesting during the chariot races. You can almost hear the host whispering to the kitchen staff. Not that lettuce, the sleepy one. The one that makes Lucius stop talking about his olive farm. There's also the matter of symbolism. Lettuce was associated with fertility in some regions, sterility in others. One god's love offering, another's tool of abstinence. How very Roman. Layered, contradictory, and just vague enough to let you believe whatever you needed to believe about your salad course. Take, for instance, the curious connection to the god Min. In Egyptian mythology, whose threads the Romans gleefully borrowed, lettuce was linked to virility. The plant's tall, upright shape and milky sap, well, the implications weren't exactly subtle. But by the time you arrive at a Roman table, lettuce has been rebranded as a gentle, chaste helper of digestion and dreams. Same plant, whole different vibe. You nibble at your imaginary serving. It's tender, slightly bitter, cut in long ribbons and dressed with a hint of cumin and mint. No Caesar dressing in sight. This is lettuce for grown-ups. Lettuce that's seen things. That's comforted senators and emperors alike. That's been offered to gods and burned in sacrifices, all while never being anything more than a frilly leaf. There's a theory, whispered between historians like gossip at the baths, that the Roman fascination with lettuce actually mirrors their wider obsession with control. They believed in structuring the body through ritual, taming appetite with order. Lettuce was a small act of mastery. You started with it to tell your stomach, "We're in charge." You ended with it to remind your body, "It's bedtime now." Still, not everyone agreed. Some writings, especially later in the empire, suggest lettuce fell out of fashion at fancier banquets. Too rustic, some called it. Peasant food, others sniffed. But the old-school hosts, the ones with a deep respect for tradition and a fear of flatulence, kept it firmly on the menu. You imagine the lettuce wars of taste, one villa insisting on spring mix, another championing romaine. Somewhere, a scandal breaks out over whether to drizzle with liquamen or just olive oil. A senator's wife faints from an overdressed salad. Scandalous. And yet, through it all, lettuce persists. Quiet, slightly wrinkled, unimpressed by your drama. Just waiting to put you to sleep, soothe your innards, and remind you that even in an empire that spans continents, some things remain delightfully simple. So as you fold the menu closed and wipe an invisible oil smudge from your fingers, you take one last look at that first line. Lactuca viridis. Not the most glamorous dish, but steady, dependable. And still the weird little leaf that held an empire's digestion together. By now you've eaten your fill, imaginarily, of course, and the lamps flicker low along the mosaic floor. But the banquet isn't over. No, not quite. You lean back, half reclining on a velvet-draped couch, and try to ignore the gentle protest of your bloated belly. A platter of grapes glides by, followed by a slave with a large feather fan and the distant clink of lyre strings. Someone starts reciting poetry. You're not sure if it's Virgil or someone just trying out their latest breakup haiku. But either way, you're in too deep now. What you've wandered into isn't just dinner. It's a ritual, a social chessboard, a power game dressed in peppered peacock. The Roman banquet was an art form and occasionally a trap. Tonight's host, let's say, is a minor senator named Publius. He's invited everyone from fellow politicians to ambitious freedmen to that one poet with the mysterious eyebrow scar. They've come not just for the food, but for the chance to curry favor, gather gossip, and out-compliment each other's sandals. Banquet seating was not random. You were placed with extreme intentionality. The triclinium, a dining room arranged in 3 couches around a table, was set up in a U shape. The position of greatest honor? The middle spot on the central couch. Get placed there, and you know you've done something right. Unless it's a trap, of course, and the wine's been watered a little too heavily in your direction. You, naturally, are somewhere on the outer edge, halfway between indifferent guest and possible future briber. Your lettuce has long since wilted on its decorative plate. A dish of boiled sow's udders has taken its place. You eye it warily. Let's talk about the entertainment. Banquets didn't just feed you. They filled your ears and dazzled your sleep-deprived eyes. There were jugglers, acrobats, dancers who may or may not have been enslaved, and flute girls who could simultaneously charm snakes and senators. Historians still argue whether these performers were considered classy additions or scandalous novelties, especially as the empire grew richer and more decadent. And of course, there was music. Sometimes it was soothing. Strings, pipes, a soft drum tapping like distant thunder. Other times, it was rowdy and intentionally distracting, particularly when the wine began to slosh. There are records of banquets devolving into interpretive dance-offs and impromptu philosophical debates, which, considering the wine content, probably sounded more profound at the time. You shift slightly on your cushion. No one's looking directly at you, but you can feel the scrutiny. Banquets were, above all, performances of identity. You wore your best toga, unless you wanted to signal ironic detachment. You laughed at the host's jokes, unless your role tonight was to play the dry wit. Even your plate choice could send a message. Did you avoid the fatty goose liver in favor of the cucumber slices? Someone noticed. Oh yes, they always noticed. A slave brings around a dish of garum-marinated eel. You politely decline, which might cost you points, but your imaginary digestion is already protesting. Besides, you're distracted by the sight of another guest pulling out a small pouch of herbs. Lettuce seeds, maybe? He begins chewing them absent-mindedly, while another guest whispers about whether this is a subtle nod to virtue or a passive-aggressive commentary on the oily fish course. You see, lettuce lingered in banquet culture not just on the plate, but in the subtext. It was part of the shared cultural shorthand. Mention lettuce in a toast, and you could be referencing moderation, or boredom, or even political criticism. A poet once called a rival as flavorless as overboiled lettuce, and the crowd howled. True shade, 1st century style. And while we're on the subject of poetic drama, don't forget Marshall, that delightfully venomous satirist who once mocked a host for serving old lettuce to his guests. Imagine arriving to your friend's dinner party and finding a vaguely wilted salad, then publicly publishing a roast poem about it. The ancient Yelp review, scrawled in rhymed hexameter. Your own host tonight, Publius, is trying to keep the mood light. He gestures for a slave to bring out the centerpiece dish, a wild boar stuffed with songbirds and honey-glazed pine cones. An exaggerated display, even for Rome. Someone claps politely. A small dog barks under the table. You think it may have been fed some of the boar's snout. More wine is poured. And as the Falernian flows, the talk turns to politics. Or maybe scandal. It's hard to tell the difference. Everyone's pretending to be modest, but the bragging is thick enough to spread on toast. One man claims his garden lettuce has medicinal properties unmatched by any apothecary. Another swears his family lineage can be traced back to Saturn himself. No one challenges him. They're too busy chewing on pomegranate seeds and counting the number of figs they've had without seeming greedy. You notice something. No one is actually relaxing. For all the reclining, for all the talk of leisure, these banquets were emotionally exhausting affairs. Every gesture, every bite, every raised eyebrow carried social weight. Miss a cue and you might not be invited back. Or worse, you'll be remembered as that guy who didn't laugh at the cucumber poem. And yet, despite it all, there's an underlying charm. The predictability, the lettuce opener, the scandalous centerpiece, the jokes that fall flat and the ones that land perfectly, the quiet moment when the music softens and someone dares to sigh a little too loudly. You do the same, letting your shoulders drop slightly. A poet begins to recite something about moonlight and olives. You half listen, watching candlelight flicker against the wine-dark wall. Somewhere across the room, someone is snoring. The banquet will continue into the night. More lettuce will arrive. This time, the sleepy kind, mixed with vinegar and coriander. Not everyone will eat it. Those who do will drift off earlier, their dreams scented faintly with mint and regret. And you? You're still here, marveling at how much can hinge on a single leaf. A garnish, a signal, a story. The room grows dimmer now, more shadow than candlelight, and the hum of conversation begins to slur into a single molasses-slow soundscape. You've stopped pretending to keep track of the courses? Was that the 6th or the 9th? You've abandoned counting. Counting, like proper posture and dignity, is now optional. You reach lazily for a dish, perhaps dates stuffed with pine nuts and wrapped in honey-soaked grape leaves. The kind of thing you wouldn't eat on purpose in the modern world. But here, at this particular Roman banquet, feels like a little jewel of decadence. The sweetness is nearly cloying, but you chew slowly, letting the syrup cling to your teeth. It's easier than talking. And anyway, the conversation has veered into territory you're less familiar with. Omens and digestive dreams. Yes, it turns out, Romans believed food could not only affect your body, but your fate. Lettuce, once again, takes center stage, like the quiet character in a play who keeps stealing scenes without even speaking. Some Romans believed that eating lettuce before bed could induce prophetic dreams. Others swore it chased away lustful thoughts, though there were just as many claims that it did the opposite. The philosopher Pliny noted both possibilities, probably while frowning at his salad and wondering if it would lead to enlightenment or scandal. Historians still argue whether these lettuce legends came from folk tradition or elite poetic imagination. But one thing's certain. No vegetable has ever been more nervously ambiguous. You swirl wine in a tiny silver cup. The reflection warps your face slightly. You imagine being a Roman for real, not just in this sleepy second-person dreamscape. You'd likely be constipated, overdressed, and mildly paranoid. But you'd also have the pleasure of discussing the philosophical properties of lettuce without anyone batting an eye. At the far end of the room, Two men are engaged in a fierce but quiet debate over the best condiment for boiled dormice. You decide not to weigh in. It's not your fight. Instead, you let your gaze travel upward. The ceiling is painted with a riot of colors. Celestial bodies, dancing figures, possibly a chicken wearing a laurel wreath. Roman banqueting rooms weren't just about the food or the furniture. They were designed to envelop you. Walls adorned with frescoes of gods and myths, ceilings that mimicked the heavens, floors so intricate they could hypnotize you. You've already seen the lettuce motif once, curled into the border of a tile, lurking like a sleepy green joke. And here's something else. Roman banquet spaces were often rigged with surprise mechanisms. Panels in the ceiling that dropped flower petals, hidden pipes that could spritz the room with rosewater. A way to show off, of course, but also a way to keep the guests distracted from how uncomfortably full they were. You shift slightly on your couch again, your tunic not quite loosening as much as you'd like. There's a subtle grunt from the guest beside you, a sign that they too have reached the point where sitting up feels like an act of rebellion. The host claps twice, and silence spills across the room like oil. A final performance begins. A solo singer, her voice thin but eerily beautiful, starts to chant something ancient. Perhaps a hymn to Bacchus, god of wine and revelry, or maybe just a lullaby for the overstuffed and over-entertained. You lean back, letting the words slide over you like silk. You don't understand them, not fully, but the mood is clear. Celebration is fading. The banquet has entered its final phase. Dessert, digestion, and drowsiness. There's a ritual here too. Just as the feast began with greens, fresh, raw, hopeful, it often ended with fruit and nuts. Light things, calming things. Figs for fertility, almonds for clear skin, pomegranate seeds for a good harvest, though more likely just to get stuck in your teeth. And then, sometimes, the lettuce would return. Yes, again, a final gesture. Served cool, often pickled or drizzled with vinegar and mint. Romans believed this closing act could help with sleep, settle the stomach, and prepare the body for rest. It's the edible equivalent of turning off notifications and slipping into soft pajamas. Some called it superstitious, others science adjacent. Historians still argue whether this practice was purely practical or if it carried a whisper of ritual. Lettuce as liminal symbol, the plant that bookended your entire evening. A guest across from you lets out a long sigh. It might be contentment. It might be defeat. A slave appears with a bowl of water for rinsing fingers, and you realize the feast is truly winding down. The singer's song trails into silence. Somewhere nearby, a candle sputters out with a soft hiss. The shadows deepen, curling around the corners of the room like lazy cats. You realize you're full, not just in your imaginary Roman belly, but in your head, saturated with sensory detail, with oil and garlic and too many names that end in us. Your fingers still smell faintly of honeyed dates. And still, in the middle of all this excess, that quiet, leafy presence hovers. Lettuce, a symbol, a garnish, a healer, a punchline. You chuckle softly, catching yourself. You've made it this far into a Roman banquet, and somehow it's the salad that keeps showing up in every scene. What a peculiar, wonderful thing, this ancient dinner. You close your eyes for just a moment, lulled by distant lyres and faint murmurs, the taste of mint lingering at the back of your tongue. Somewhere in the half-sleep between worlds, you imagine the lettuce nodding sagely in approval. Your eyes drift half open, still sunk into the velvety dreamscape of that Roman dining room. The singer is gone, replaced by the gentle scrape of plates being cleared, footsteps padding softly across mosaic floors. You've moved from the riotous center of the banquet into its quiet aftermath, the realm where only the most stubborn, or well-marinated guests remain reclined. Someone hands you a small dish. It's simple. Figs soaked in wine, maybe a few candied almonds. Nothing to challenge your senses. Just soft, sleepy sweetness. Dessert was never a Roman spectacle in the way earlier courses could be. It was a gentle sigh at the end of a symphony. And of course, there is lettuce again. This time pickled, presented cold, as a kind of final joke by the gods of indigestion. You swirl the chilled leaves around your plate, wondering if the same plant you idly chopped into a sandwich last week once carried divine significance. Back then, lettuce had a connection to more than just digestion or dreams. Some Roman religious ceremonies incorporated it, especially those tied to funerary rites or rituals of rebirth. The plant's tendency to bolt quickly, growing tall and bitter when neglected, was seen as a metaphor for life speeding into decay. Comforting. Even more curious, the god Min, imported from Egypt and worshipped sporadically in Roman times, was often associated with lettuce. He was a fertility deity, and the tall, milk-sapped lettuce stalk was linked to male potency. Historians still argue whether this interpretation was widely believed or just a theological inside joke that got wildly out of hand. Either way, it means your salad once had strong opinions about your love life. You recline a little further, belly warmed by wine and trivia. A few guests have begun quietly snoring. One man has tilted entirely off his couch, a noble collapse onto cool tiles. Nobody moves to help him. It's a place of permission now. Permission to doze, to forget, to dream. You glance at the walls again. They're covered in painted panels. Gods mid-dramatic gesture, nymphs pouring wine, satyrs leering with exaggerated delight. One scene shows a feast not unlike this one, though with more mythological interference. Dionysus, drunk and glowing, is holding up a drinking horn the size of a small horse. Around him, mortals laugh too hard at jokes that are clearly divine in-jokes. You imagine yourself inside that panel, cheeky and immortal, casually tossing grapes into a chimera's mouth while arguing the merits of cumin. Outside the real world of this imagined triclinium, Rome thrums with life. But you're sealed inside this floating chamber of stories and smells and soft lamplight. The banquet space was designed for that, to remove you from the rhythm of the street. Time behaves strangely here. A single feast could last from mid-afternoon deep into the night, measured not by hours, but by the waning of appetite and energy. A few slaves reappear, this time bearing warm cloths, small flasks of rose oil, dishes of perfumed water. Romans weren't content with merely eating. You had to be bathed, scented, soothed. This wasn't just food. It was ritual and theater and gentle performance art. You wipe your hands, letting the faint scent of myrrh drift upward. A fellow guest, a little more alert than you, leans over to share a half-remembered anecdote about Emperor Claudius, who once fell asleep mid-banquet and allegedly woke with a lettuce leaf still clinging to his chin. You smile. That feels about right. Lettuce wasn't just confined to your mouth or stomach. The Romans ground it into poultices, mixed it with vinegar for skin treatments, even applied it directly to sore muscles. One popular folk remedy was lettuce leaves steeped in wine to reduce fever. Essentially, an herbal compress with a hangover clause. They believed it cooled the body, balanced hot conditions, and helped restore humoral equilibrium. Like being nursed back to health by a particularly mellow salad bar, your mind wanders now, tugged by fatigue and historical curiosity. You picture Roman farmers tending to vast garden plots, carefully cultivating the leafy greens that would end up at the tables of senators, poets, and slightly overambitious historians. The lettuce fields near Pompeii were especially prized. Fertile volcanic soil, generous sun, a steady water supply. Some of the best lettuce in the empire, they said, came from Campania. You wonder what a Roman farmer might think if they could see your fridge. Pre-washed lettuce in a plastic clamshell, possibly 3 days past its prime. Possibly also infused with just a trace of lost ritual and divine ambiguity. Back in your banquet dream, the room quiets further. Most guests have left, slipping into the night with gentle farewells and heavy stomachs. A few linger, too full or too drunk or too enchanted by the ambience to move. You remain reclining, eyes half closed, tracing your fingertip along a groove in the marble table. The host, magnanimous and flushed with success, offers you a final sip of something light. Honeyed wine, perhaps, or a spiced digestif brewed by his grandmother's cook. You raise your cup in a sleepy toast, to lettuce, to dream feasts, to never quite knowing if what you've just eaten was medicine or mystery. The host laughs softly. "You'll sleep well," he says. You believe him. The lights in the banquet room have dimmed to little more than flickering orange puddles of oil lamp glow, dancing lazily on bronze trays and polished tile. You're still stretched comfortably on your left side, because of course, Roman etiquette frowned on reclining the other way. Something about your liver, or just fussy upper-class habits. Either way, you've committed to the sideways sprawl, one sandal barely clinging to your heel, your brain somewhere between Roman reality and soft sleep logic. Someone plays a cithara nearby, the plucked notes warbling in and out of key. You suspect it's less about skill and more about the wine taking its toll. Still, the notes echo pleasantly, bouncing off walls painted centuries ago with scenes of Arcadian peace. Shepherds lounging, goats leaping, nymphs entirely unbothered by the concept of time. You're beginning to understand how those paintings felt. From the corner of the room, a server appears again, quietly setting a fresh plate in front of you. You blink slowly at it. Yes, it's lettuce again. But this time, it's been dressed with a thick paste of honey and vinegar, perhaps some black pepper crushed into it, a kind of proto-salad dressing, the Roman answer to vinaigrette, sweet, sour, sharp, and oddly comforting. The Romans didn't just toss things into bowls and call them salads. Oh no, there were layers of consideration, pairings based on flavor, texture, even temperament. Lettuce, in their eyes, was naturally cold and moist, so it paired best with ingredients that were hot and dry. Mustard, vinegar, sharp herbs. This wasn't taste science, it was humoral theory. You weren't just feeding your belly, you were balancing your body's inner weather. Historians still argue whether these combinations were truly believed to cure ailments, or if they simply added a veneer of health to what was, essentially, a really extravagant excuse to stuff yourself while sounding scholarly. Some Roman cookbooks even included recipes specifically titled, "to aid sleep," or "to calm the stomach after indulgence." Lettuce shows up often, usually boiled first. Yes, boiled lettuce. Don't worry, you're allowed to wince. Boiling lettuce was believed to reduce its bitterness and increase its soporific effect. Supposedly, a few leaves soaked in warm water before bed could knock out even the most anxious philosopher. You look at the leaves on your plate again and wonder if they're trying to lull you into one last course or just into unconsciousness. Across the room, a small group of guests have begun playing knucklebones, an early version of dice using animal bones instead of cubes. They toss them lazily onto a low marble table, wagering slurred oaths and leftover dates. One man laughs too hard and chokes on a pomegranate seed. No one rushes to help. He recovers with dramatic coughing, waving off concern like a bad actor exiting stage left. You sip at your diluted wine, Romans rarely drank it straight, and let the flavors settle on your tongue. The sharp tang of the vinegar from your lettuce dish lingers. There's something about the contrast of bitter and sweet that feels ancient and wise, as if your taste buds are being taught something you can't quite put into words. A servant passes behind you, carrying a tray of herbs. Mint, coriander, rue. Some are tucked into guests' hair, others are crushed beneath the fingers of those who want a final scent before bed. It was believed certain herbs could ward off indigestion, or at least mask it with a pleasing smell. Nearby, a philosopher and a minor senator are arguing quietly about the ethics of eating dormice. You tune them out, not because it's uninteresting, but because your attention is caught by the ceiling. It's painted in elaborate coffered patterns, with tiny scenes nestled into each square. One shows a lettuce plant being tended by a woman in flowing robes. Another features a fawn, peeking out from behind a cabbage. You don't know if these are meant to be symbolic, humorous, or just examples of very hungry artists. The air smells faintly of oil and toasted nuts, with that ever-present undertone of wine and ancient stone. It's a scent you're sure will follow you into dreams. In this final stretch of the feast, conversations drift. Eyes grow heavy. Some guests have reclined all the way onto their backs, a posture usually reserved for those about to nap. Or perhaps, according to some Roman texts, those about to meet the gods in a different kind of sleep. You spot your host again, still miraculously upright, still smiling. He gestures toward your plate with a raised brow. You nod, unsure if you're approving or simply too tired to argue. He leans down, whispering something about Emperor Augustus, who, legend has it, once claimed lettuce cured him of a grave illness, though other sources say it gave him terrible stomach pain. Historians still argue whether he meant the same kind of lettuce you're chewing now, or whether Roman lettuce varied wildly by region, season, and philosophical mood. The idea that an emperor would publicly praise a vegetable feels oddly intimate, like if your head of state issued a decree in defense of celery. Absurd, and yet very human. Another bite. The vinegar's sharpness has dulled. You chew slowly, listening to the last few chords of the cithara drifting upward. The player is nodding off now, fingers fumbling against strings. The room grows warmer, fuzzier. You lie back on the couch, etiquette be damned, and close your eyes for a moment. The couch feels soft enough. The buzz of wine, the weight of the meal, the gentle hush of ancient pleasantries swirling around you, all conspiring to lull you into a deeper quiet. If you fall asleep now, no one will wake you. If anything, they'll tuck another lettuce leaf in your hand, whisper a blessing from Min, and let you slip into the kind of dream only Rome can serve. Rich, ridiculous, vaguely medicinal. You wake, not fully, just enough to shift your weight, resettle your cheek into the crook of a velvet cushion, and half listen to the low thrum of voices curling through the banquet hall like incense. The feast is fading into its final, dreamy act. That delicate place between digestion and dozing, where the laughter softens, the wine sloshes slower, and the lettuce has done its job. But even now, in this liminal moment, a servant arrives with something unexpected. A little clay dish, steaming ever so gently, carrying, yes, once again, lettuce. This time, though, it's warm and spiced. The leaves are barely holding together, braised in a broth that smells of anise and lovage. A drizzle of oil catches the light like a silk ribbon. You're not surprised. Romans believed lettuce was best consumed in a wide variety of ways depending on the time of day, the weather, your bodily humors, and possibly your social standing. This iteration? Likely meant as a SOP for sleep, or at the very least a digestive hush to close out the evening. As you take a slow bite, your thoughts begin to drift. Not just from the meal, but from the room itself, carried backward into the fields and farms beyond the city. where this lettuce, this actual physical plant, first sprouted. The Roman Empire didn't invent lettuce, but it certainly gave it one of its stranger chapters. The plant has roots, literal and historical, in ancient Egypt, where it was associated with fertility and sacred rites. There, it grew tall and lanky, its seeds used to make oil. Later, the Greeks adopted it, but they were oddly morose about it. Lettuce to them symbolized death because of its cooling nature and supposed sedative effects. Greek women were even discouraged from eating too much of it, lest it chill the womb. By the time the Romans got their hands on it, the plant had undergone a bit of a personality shift. The Romans bred it lower, leafier, and more palatable, with varieties cultivated specifically for different social occasions. Crisp for daytime meals, wilted and warm for nighttime feasts, like the one you're lounging in now. You chew slowly, wondering if the man next to you knows he's eating a plant once sacred to Egyptian fertility gods, and then blamed by Greek physicians for afternoon depression. Lettuce has really been through it. Historians still argue whether the transformation of lettuce, from sacred to sleepy, from funerary symbol to side dish, was intentional or simply one of those slow cultural evolutions, like how we went from worshipping fire to installing electric stoves no one knows how to clean. It's comforting, in a strange way, to imagine generations of farmers gently fussing over lettuce, selecting seeds, watching the leaves, arguing about leaf length and bitterness. The world of ancient agriculture wasn't glamorous, but it was the steady heartbeat of the empire. Without these growers, your meal tonight wouldn't exist. Somewhere far from this villa, a farmer is asleep in a stone house, dirt still under his nails, unaware that the lettuce he harvested 2 mornings ago has traveled on a mule, across a road paved by Roman engineers, into the hands of a cook trained in Galenic medicine, and now into your mouth, just as your eyelids begin to sink. The spice lingers. You can taste a hint of silphium, a mysterious seasoning lost to time. Roman cooks loved it, prized it, harvested it to extinction. Some scholars believe it was a wild fennel, others insist it was something entirely unique. You savor the possibility that your dish contains a whisper of that lost flavor, whether real or imagined. Around you, guests shift. Some are already snoring. One older woman is quietly humming to herself, tracing lazy circles on the table with her pinky finger. A child, some senator's bored son, sleeps curled under his mother's cloak near the wall. Even the cat, who earlier strutted past the roast boar like a food critic, has tucked himself onto a cushion and given in. The room has gone from feast to cocoon. The brazier's glow softens. From outside, a breeze slips through a crack in the window shutter. You catch the scent of cypress, of old stone, of damp earth. It smells like night arriving at last. Another servant brings by a tray of perfumed towels, warm, damp, delicately scented with rose and bay. You press one to your face, the heat blooming over your cheeks. Even in their decadence, the Romans understood the importance of winding down. Your host, ever attentive, clinks a final cup and offers a soft word of thanks. He talks briefly about how Emperor Tiberius once demanded fresh lettuce be grown for him year-round, in portable greenhouses lined with mica windows to trap the sun. Some historians suggest it may have been one of the earliest recorded uses of greenhouse tech, because of course, even emperors wanted salad in December. You can't help but smirk. Tiberius, moody and brutal, brooding in his cliffside palace in Capri, spooning warm lettuce into his mouth and thinking about conquest. It's a ridiculous image, and somehow perfect. The plate before you is nearly empty. The oil glistens faintly in the low light. Somewhere above you, an oil lamp gutters, casting brief shadows that stretch and wobble before settling again. This moment, The quiet hush after excess is something the Romans savored, perhaps more than the meal itself. They called it otium, a word hard to translate. It's more than leisure. It's the kind of unstructured peace that follows structure, a reward for showing up, reclining properly, eating your lettuce without complaint. You've earned it. Your body feels heavy. Not in a bad way. More like a well-packed amphora, full of memories and honeyed vinegar. The pillow beneath your head no longer feels Roman. It just feels soft. There's a sweetness at the edge of your tongue. Whether from the wine or the lettuce, you can't say. But it's enough to carry you one step closer to sleep. And in the morning, when you wake, centuries away from this villa, in a room full of modern light and unpainted ceilings, you might still crave something green, something bitter, something old. Not because it will cure you, but because, like all things born from ritual and comfort, lettuce tells you, you are done for the night. You may rest. The silence that settles now is not quite silent. More like a soft, drowsy hum, the way a seashell holds the memory of ocean waves. You're still at the banquet, still wrapped in the warm, wine-heavy stillness of the late Roman night. But everything is quieter now. The clinking has faded, the flutes have gone mute, and the voices have slipped into murmurs too gentle to follow. Even your thoughts begin to yawn. You're not asleep yet, but you're close. And so are your hosts, stretched out like gently toppled statues along the couches. You glance toward the corner where the serving boys, once darting like minnows, now sit on their haunches, picking at leftover figs and watching the lanterns flicker. It's the moment after indulgence and before departure. And somehow, even now, someone is talking about lettuce. Apparently, lettuce was once seen not just as a food or a digestive aid, but as a moral statement. Pliny the Elder, yes, that Pliny, the one who tried to categorize the universe before being obliterated by a volcano, wrote at length about its virtues. He claimed that lettuce could cure sleeplessness, cool an overheated liver, and even restore a weary mind. He wasn't alone. Galen, the celebrity doctor of his day, praised lettuce for its soporific qualities and digestive charm. But not all lettuces were created equal. You see, Galen advised using different varieties depending on your temperament. Nervous senators? They'd get the milder, leafier kinds. Angry generals? The bitter, stalk-heavy kind. One variety even had a latex-like sap and was used as a mild sedative. Basically the original sleepy time tea, with crunch. Historians still argue whether this ancient lettuce as medicine approach was grounded in real effect or placebo laced with cultural momentum. After all, if every doctor, writer, and dinner guest tells you lettuce brings peace, your body might just comply to keep up appearances. Roman minds, like modern ones, were quite persuadable. You stretch a little, figuratively, perhaps literally, and let your thoughts meander. It's oddly endearing, this idea that lettuce held a kind of moral weight. The Stoic philosopher Seneca reportedly praised simple meals, and a plate of lettuce might have been the ultimate signal that you were too virtuous to gorge on peacock tongues or fried dormice. And that brings you to a curious turn in Roman thinking. To eat simply could be just as performative as excess. The elite would sometimes stage humble banquets, where the food was deliberately rustic, almost poor. Barley mush, olives, lettuce. But the cushions were still velvet, and the wine still imported from a very specific hillside in Sicily. There's something amusing about this lettuce as virtue contest. Imagine two senators comparing notes. Ah yes, I had only boiled turnips and lettuce last night, drenched in moral superiority and olive oil. You almost hear it. A servant strolls by, gathering plates, carefully folding napkins with the same dignity reserved for folding togas. You wonder if he knows how many meanings have been piled onto this leafy green. fertility, death, discipline, digestion, simplicity, and seduction. That's a lot for one vegetable to carry. Speaking of seduction, lettuce wasn't always seen as tame and innocent. In certain myths, particularly among the Greeks, lettuce was entangled with the story of Adonis. He died in a bed of lettuce, which might sound like a peaceful way to go, but the symbolism was murky. Some interpret it as the plant's connection to male impotence, others to its sleep-inducing qualities. The lettuce bed became a metaphor for premature endings, not exactly a rousing endorsement. Still, the Romans, ever eager to reinterpret and repurpose, washed all that away, or at least steeped it in enough wine to forget. For them, lettuce became a sleepy luxury. It wasn't scandalous, it was practical. You lift your cup, though only in your mind now. It's the part of the evening where imagination becomes a more vivid sense than touch. The drink is probably diluted wine. Romans rarely drank theirs straight. In fact, serving undiluted wine was considered barbaric. There's that classic Roman moderation again, except when they weren't moderate at all. The last taste of lettuce lingers. Strange how something so bland by today's standards was once a flavor worth cultivating with such care. Ancient Roman farmers recorded minute differences in leaf shape, bitterness, stalk color, even how quickly it wilted once picked. The best varieties had celebrity names, or were associated with noble patrons. You can't help but think of modern food trends. The artisanal lettuces at upscale grocery stores, packaged with names like Butter Bliss or Baby Gem. Maybe we're not so different after all. There's a theory, only whispered among bored scholars, that some Roman banquet hosts may have even doctored their lettuce, sprinkled a little opium here, a bit of poppy extract there, just enough to enhance the sleepiness. A naughty leaf, if you will. It's probably apocryphal but delightful to imagine. The debate continues. Did the Romans truly believe lettuce could make you sleepy? Or was it just part of the bedtime ritual? A sort of culinary lullaby? Historians still argue, and you find that oddly comforting. The past, like the present, is full of half-truths wrapped in routine. The banquet room grows even quieter now. Someone has extinguished one of the oil lamps, and the darkness spreads like spilled ink across the marble floor. The shadows grow friendlier, like old pets curling up at your feet. You feel warm, full, slightly lettucey, and very far away from the noise of your own time. A final image comes to you. Maybe imagined, maybe remembered from a mosaic. A Roman child reaching for a stalk of lettuce, grinning because he knows it's forbidden before the main course. His mother gently pulling it away, murmuring something about digestion and dignity. It's a sweet memory. Maybe it's not yours. Maybe it's everyone's. You don't need to get up. You don't need to leave the banquet just yet. The feast is ending, yes, but there are still stories to float through. The lettuce has done its work. Your eyes close a little more. You don't know how much time has passed. Maybe minutes, maybe centuries. But when your thoughts resurface, they do so like lazy bubbles in a shallow bath. Slow, round, and reluctant to burst. You're still draped on a Roman dining couch, the velvet worn soft by centuries of imagined guests. And a breeze stirs the woven curtains just enough to remind you, this isn't your world. You've borrowed it. You're passing through. The banquet, though quieter now, isn't quite over. There's always one guest who lingers too long, one host too polite to send them packing. Someone yawns behind a gold-handled fan. Someone else chuckles at a joke no one heard. A flute starts to play a few soft notes, like it's trying to lull even the walls to sleep. You reach for your goblet, again, maybe only in your mind, and find nothing in it. But a servant appears without being called, refills it with what looks like watered wine, and then quietly slips back into the shadows. Efficiency like that would cost a fortune on DoorDash. You take a small sip. It tastes faintly of rosemary and copper. The wine is light, designed to soothe rather than spark. A palate rinse for the soul. And here comes more lettuce. Not in a bowl, this time, but folded carefully into small bundles beside honeyed cheese and bits of dried fish. These are the leftovers of the leftovers, the edible punctuation marks at the end of a gluttonous paragraph. You nibble at one absently. It's soft, a little bitter, like a green yawn. Across the room, a philosopher in a loosely belted toga begins to pontificate. Not loudly, just enough to remind everyone he's still very much available for existential commentary. He launches into a tale of Cato the Elder, who famously enforced strict discipline in Roman households. According to the philosopher, Cato demanded that his slaves eat the same lettuce as he did. None of that better food for the master nonsense. Lettuce equality. Revolutionary stuff. But was it kindness or control? Historians still argue whether Cato's lettuce policy was progressive or simply another tool for demonstrating dominance. Even in austerity, the philosopher drones, there is hierarchy. You chew slowly and pretend not to hear. Someone else mentions a curious tidbit. Lettuce appeared in Roman funerals, placed near the body or served to mourners. It symbolized the fading of vitality, the withering of green into death. Not exactly the vibe you expect at dinner, but the Romans did love a good contradiction. It all makes sense when you remember they saw lettuce as both a sleep aid and a death metaphor, like a polite exit from the banquet of life. You're half tempted to laugh, but only half. The lettuce is too persuasive. The room grows dimmer. The torches along the wall are beginning to die out, and the smoke that curls above them carries the scent of sandalwood and ancient ash. You breathe it in like someone sniffing pages from a really old book, trying to taste the dust of centuries. Suddenly, you remember the story of Augustus Caesar, who supposedly relied on lettuce to recover from illness. His physician prescribed it with monk-like certainty, and the emperor credited it with restoring his imperial vim. That's right. The lettuce healed the emperor. Or so the story goes. Historians, of course, still debate whether Augustus really owed his life to salad. Some suggest it was a lucky placebo. Others point out that a week of rest and boiled vegetables will fix just about anything, except boredom. Still, Augustus was so pleased, he reportedly made lettuce part of the imperial diet. Talk about state-sponsored produce. The flute starts again, this time a little more confident, weaving a lazy tune that doesn't quite go anywhere. You find yourself swaying slightly, like your thoughts are on a hammock strung between two marble columns. Another plate appears. Honey-roasted walnuts, dried apricots, and yes, a final arrangement of finely chopped lettuce dressed in oil and mint. It's barely food at this point, more like a final nod to the ritual. The banquet bows to itself. Somewhere in the shadows, someone burps discreetly, and another guest mutters a half-hearted prayer to Bacchus, god of wine and wild evenings. Not exactly a roaring tribute. But by now, even the gods are yawning. You consider the possibility that this entire feast, the hours of food, the cascade of flavors, the whispered gossip, the lectures on leafy greens, has simply been a long, socially acceptable way of preparing everyone for sleep. A kind of collective wind down, masked as merriment. And in that way, maybe lettuce really was the perfect finale. Not exciting, not sexy, but gentle. Like a soft nudge saying, "All right now, time to go." You lean back into the cushions, and your view tilts toward the ceiling. The frescoes above are fading, but you can still make out figures dancing among vines, nymphs and satyrs, caught in some eternal vineyard party. You try to count how many of them are holding lettuce. It's harder than you'd think. Another guest shifts beside you and quietly groans. Not from discomfort, but from the sheer weight of indulgence. You feel it, too. A warm heaviness, like your body is becoming part of the couch. Maybe that's how Roman furniture worked. Sit long enough and you get absorbed. Someone is humming now. A servant, maybe. The tune is old and circular, one of those melodies designed to never quite resolve. It loops around like a lazy river, dragging your thoughts with it. You wonder if somewhere, in some dusty Roman cookbook, there's a forgotten recipe that reads, "Take your guests, fill them with wine, serve lettuce, then wait." Simple, effective, almost poetic. A final memory surfaces, unbidden. A Roman poet, Pliny or Horace or one of those toga-wearing verse machines, once likened lettuce to the quiet breeze before sleep. You're not sure if that's real or if your brain just made it up, but it fits so well you don't bother questioning. The philosopher has stopped talking. Or maybe he just ran out of breath. Either way, it's quiet now, except for the occasional snore and the rhythmic creak of a servant collecting cushions. The last drops of wine shimmer in goblets like forgotten rubies. You close your eyes. You're not asleep yet. But you are lettuce, and so you lie there, drifting on a cushion that somehow feels both borrowed and eternal, half listening to the dying rustle of a banquet fading into whispers. You're surrounded by shadows in tunics, sandals askew, limbs flung like sleepy marionettes across couches. It's like a very tired toga party slowed to a crawl, then paused indefinitely. But your mind won't quite shut off yet. It flits, lazily, toward another curiosity. The architecture. As your eyes lazily scan the mosaic tiles underfoot and the faded frescoes climbing the walls, you catch sight of a painted vegetable border. Yes, there it is, curling along the base of the dining room wall like a decorative salad. Lettuce, more lettuce. The symbolism never lets up. You recall how Romans didn't just eat the stuff, they displayed it. Wealthy households would commission wall paintings of gardens, herbs, and yes, entire lettuce rows, especially in their triclinia, the formal dining rooms like the one you're sprawled in. Art historian types still debate whether these paintings were meant to be decorative, aspirational, or some ancient form of psychological seasoning. Were they hungry? Or just humble bragging about their well-tended gardens? One detail your wandering gaze lands on is a painted peacock, ridiculously elegant, strutting alongside a leafy vine. Peacocks and lettuce, the Roman equivalent of a dinner party flex. If you had those two things on hand, you were doing all right. But speaking of gardens, you remember a story about Roman villa owners cultivating lettuce not just for taste, but for spiritual vibes. They believed it helped calm the household gods, the Laras and Penates, little deities of hearth and home. There are even surviving household shrines where bits of wilted lettuce were found, as though someone left them there as a sleepy time offering. A bedtime snack for the divine. And here's a kicker. At least one Roman garden manual refers to lettuce as the moon's vegetable. Because of course it is. Pale, slow-growing, best harvested in cool darkness. It practically begs to be wrapped in a myth. Some scholars think this nickname hints at old lunar planting calendars, while others suspect it's simply poetic nonsense, the kind Romans adored. Historians still argue whether the moon veg thing held ritual significance or was just ancient farmers' lore with a romantic PR team. In either case, you kind of love it. Lettuce, moon fruit, sleep herb, edible wallpaper. The walls around you shimmer faintly as torchlight reflects off the polished marble. You're not even sure if you're still awake or if this is just a dreamlet snuck in through the back door of your brain. Someone clinks a cup, far off. A servant giggles. A dog sneezes. You return to the image of the gardens. Roman villa gardens weren't just for show. They were engineered marvels of order and control. Think manicured hedges, trimmed laurels, and perfect rows of vegetables like sleepy soldiers. Lettuce was often planted in symmetrical beds, paired with herbs like coriander and mint. Some even grew special varieties that looked more like bouquets than groceries. And yes, believe it or not, Roman elites were picky about their lettuce breeds. Long before modern farmers got into heirlooms and kale hybrids, ancient Roman agriculturalists were debating things like Lactuca sativa crispa versus the sturdier, more upright romaine-style lettuces. Columella, that old Roman writer of everything boring and botanical, described lettuce varieties in painstaking detail, noting how some were more soporific than others. Historians still argue whether Columella's recommendations were based on actual observed effects or just the culinary equivalent of fan fiction. Either way, he had lettuce opinions, and they were not brief. Back at the banquet, someone moans quietly in their sleep. Not a bad dream. More like the vocalization of someone sinking too deep into velvet. A hand dangles off a couch, fingers twitching like they're still reaching for grapes. But the fruit bowls are empty now. Just stems and the odd forgotten fig. You notice the smell in the room has shifted. Less roast meat and perfume, more beeswax and ashes. The night is closing in, pressing gently against the columns. Outside, maybe a breeze moves through the cypress trees. Inside, only the sound of breathing and the occasional crinkle of fabric as someone adjusts themselves mid-slumber. You picture a Roman matron padding through her garden at dusk, inspecting the lettuce rows with a small oil lamp, muttering under her breath about slugs. She picks a few soft heads, pats the earth back into place, and returns to the villa with her leafy spoils. Her husband, half reclined already, is waiting with the wine. They both believe it'll help them sleep. And weirdly, they're not wrong. You smile slightly. In a way, this whole night has been a long lullaby composed of dinner courses, drowsy lectures, and lukewarm lettuce. You remember that Pliny the Elder, Rome's ultimate trivia machine, swore by lettuce for curing insomnia, though he also recommended wolf's liver and powdered pearls for similar issues. Maybe take that with a grain of garum. Still, Pliny's faith in lettuce as nature's snooze button stuck. For centuries after Rome's fall, medieval herbals kept parroting his advice, often with bizarre upgrades, like boiling lettuce in wine, or blending it into a sleep potion with vinegar and crushed rose petals. That last one sounds suspiciously like something your most annoying wellness friend would post on Instagram. Historians still argue whether any of these concoctions actually worked, or whether people were just bored enough to believe they did. But when you're staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night, hoping for any kind of reprieve, even bitter salad water starts to sound miraculous. You shift slightly and catch the edge of a tapestry swaying in the breeze. It shows a pastoral scene. Shepherds reclining under olive trees, a picnic basket open, and there, nestled between figs and cheese, a little head of lettuce. It's so deliberate you almost laugh. Even in leisure art, the Romans couldn't resist slipping in a veggie cameo. Another yawn echoes in the room. Yours? Maybe. Someone else's? Possibly. It doesn't matter. You're part of the scenery now. A very full, very relaxed human lettuce, wrapped in silk and soft exhaustion. Someone hums that flute melody again, slower this time. It's probably just in your mind. And all the while, the garden beyond the villa breathes gently. Rows of lettuce bask in moonlight, dewy and upright, as though awaiting harvest or applause. The scent of wilted herbs and sleep-warm marble drifts through the air, faint and familiar. You're still lying there, among half-snoring nobles, your head sinking a little deeper into a cushion that now feels like it's made of warm bread. Someone's toga rustles nearby, a gentle exhale from fabric too tired to care. This late into the banquet, even the walls look sleepy. The candlelight doesn't flicker anymore. It sort of sighs. But something odd draws your attention. You spot a server, one of the younger ones, moving with curious purpose across the floor. He carries a tray. And what's on it? Not more wine, not pastries or honey cakes. No, it's lettuce. Again, this isn't dinner anymore. It's medicinal. The leaves are damp, the green darker than before. This is the after-meal lettuce, the closer, the edible lullaby. You watch as it's set before a guest curled like a shrimp on a couch. He opens one eye, tears a leaf from the bunch, and chews slowly, as if it were the final step in a sacred ritual. Maybe it is. You begin to understand. Lettuce wasn't just appetizer and decoration. In the Roman mind, it was a kind of physiological punctuation mark. You start with it to awaken the stomach. You end with it to coax the body into sleep. It's the herbal semicolon of a well-structured feast. The server vanishes again, soundless as a shadow. You wonder how many heads of lettuce were consumed across the empire in this manner. How many Roman citizens fell asleep with a little green bitterness still clinging to their tongues. You recall an old Roman saying, "Sicut lactuca somnum parat," just as lettuce prepares sleep. There it is. The plant didn't just help digestion. It guided the guest from overindulgence to gentle descent. Historians still argue whether the sedative effect was real or placebo. After all, the lettuce varieties back then were richer in lactucarium, the milky sap the plant oozes when cut. Some believe that substance, sometimes called lettuce opium, had a mild numbing effect. Others think Romans just convinced themselves it worked, like people today with melatonin gummies and whale sounds. Whatever the truth, Roman banquet customs built themselves around this leafy finale. And not just the food. Social cues came with it. Once lettuce was served again, the message was clear. Eat it, wind down, and leave. Or in more polite terms, exit through the salad. You shift slightly on your cushion. And imagine you're in a countryside villa this time, not an urban palace. The dinner guests are fewer, quieter. The stars are clearer. And the host, older, gray-bearded with a voice like gravel in wine, raises a hand. The musicians stop. Plates are cleared. The servants bring out the last course. Cool lettuce dressed with vinegar and salt. Nobody speaks now. This isn't a time for jokes or politics. This is the descent phase. One woman leans her head against the stucco wall. A man folds his napkin in his lap like he's prepping for a nap instead of wiping his hands. It's all so deliberate, and it works. Even in the written records, you can sense the deep connection between lettuce and sleep. Galen, the Roman physician whose medical advice lasted longer than most empires, insisted that lettuce moistens the body and cools the mind. Sounds gross, but also weirdly accurate when you're sliding into sleep next to a brazier of fading coals. Even emperors swore by it. Augustus himself was allegedly treated for insomnia with a strict lettuce regimen. One source claims his personal doctor wouldn't let him touch wine until after he'd eaten a full bowl of it. Who knew Caesar salad had such historical clout? Historians still debate whether this account was exaggerated for effect, yet the image sticks. Augustus, God on earth, emperor of all, chewing obediently on his greens before bed like a child under strict orders. You let your thoughts wander to the sheer number of lettuces involved in daily Roman life. Beyond meals and medicine, it had superstitious connotations too. Some Romans believed sleeping with lettuce under your pillow helped ward off nightmares. Others warned that too much lettuce could cause sterility or melancholy. Honestly, the leafy politics were exhausting. And then, there's the ritual use. During certain festivals, priests would include lettuce in sacrificial offerings, especially during springtime celebrations tied to fertility or agricultural bounty. One frayed inscription even hints that in some mystery cults, lettuce was placed at altars during nighttime rituals to symbolize the boundary between life and sleep, or life and death. Because nothing says deep spiritual metaphor like a salad. Outside the dining room, the night deepens. You hear the whispery hush of wind through cypress trees, and you imagine it's rustling the leaves in a field of Roman lettuces, those tall, nodding heads under starlight, waiting patiently to be plucked. Someone snores nearby, a wet little exhale like a drowsy ox. It almost makes you laugh. The banquet is over now. The couches are mostly empty. Some guests have found their way to nearby rooms or curled up where they sat. The servers move softly among them, collecting goblets and plates, snuffing out candles one by one until the shadows win. You watch one final figure approach a corner altar, kneel slightly, and place something small and leafy into a tiny dish. Lettuce again. A farewell snack for the gods, perhaps. A lullaby for whatever spirits watch over drowsy houses, and you feel it. The slow, warm gravity pulling you under, like the tide at night. Your limbs are heavy now, your thoughts thick with quiet. Even your curiosity has curled up somewhere at the back of your brain and asked politely to be left alone. In the end, you realize the lettuce isn't just a food. It's a gesture, a signal, a soft green curtain falling at the end of a well-performed evening. The Romans, for all their violence and vanity, knew how to end a night with strange, sleepy grace. You turn your face towards the cooling tiles and close your eyes, the ghost taste of ancient bitterness on your tongue. You're floating now, somewhere between full and fast asleep, drifting gently like the last leaf in an autumn breeze. But your mind, ever curious even in its drowsiest state, nudges you once more, pulling you back to the banquet hall, just for a few more steps. There's one final thing that keeps tapping on the edges of your thoughts. Why did it matter so much? Why did the Romans build entire rituals around a vegetable you could barely use as a pillow? You glance again at the remnants of the banquet. The wine-stained linen, overturned amphorae, olive pits rolling quietly like marbles across the floor. Somewhere near the atrium, a fountain gurgles its own lazy lullaby. And there, left uneaten on a tray, one final bunch of lettuce. Crisp, green, perfectly unremarkable, yet somehow revered. Let's rewind for a second, like you're scrolling back through the evening with a sleepy thumb. From the way it opened the meal to how it wrapped things up, lettuce was more than just a leaf to Romans. It was control, order, a soft signal to the stomach and spirit. This is when you begin. This is when you let go. You stretch your legs out, listening to the floor creak beneath you. The villa may be imaginary, but your body reacts like it's there, sinking into the same cold mosaic tiles the Romans once walked across, barefoot, bleary-eyed, hoping the post-lettuce calm would erase the night's indulgences. But here's the fun twist. Not everyone agreed on lettuce's calming qualities. While many praised its cooling nature, others swore it brought sadness, even dullness of mind. Pliny the Elder, that walking encyclopedia of oddities, once claimed that certain wild varieties of lettuce caused dreams so vivid they might lead to prophecy or madness. Yes, imagine tossing and turning under imperial silk sheets, haunted by visions of marching centurions made entirely of cabbage. That's the risk you took when you nibbled too much before bed. Historians still argue whether the Romans actually believed these myths or just enjoyed repeating them at parties. Either way, the stories stuck. It became part of the lettuce lore, equal parts bedtime snack and psychic doorway. And here's another wrinkle. There's evidence the type of lettuce most popular back then wasn't the soft, leafy butterhead we know today. It was more like romaine, tall, bitter, and tough enough to hold up in the desert heat. It took effort to eat. It wasn't melting on your tongue with dreamy grace. This was lettuce that made you work for your peace. You let your hand drift in the air, tracing the shape of a Roman leaf. Long, ribbed, a bit stiff. A practical choice, really. It grew fast, lasted in the markets, and didn't wilt in a chariot ride across town. Even the gods couldn't complain. The symbology got more tangled when you dug into specific festivals. In certain fertility rites, lettuce took on more ominous meanings. The death of Adonis, for example, a Greek story beloved by Roman poets, was supposedly linked to the plant. They said Venus laid his body on a bed of lettuce after he was gored by a boar, which frankly feels a bit like choosing a mattress made of celery. But the idea stuck. Lettuce was associated with mourning, rest, and the transition between realms. And this wasn't just mythology. In some households, particularly in the wealthier districts of Rome or Alexandria, families would place lettuce among funerary offerings. Not just flowers or coins for Karen, but salad. Because apparently, you never know when the gods might be peckish. You shift a bit, eyes still closed, but the images continue. Somewhere in your half-dream, you're back in the kitchen wing, where cooks whisper about their clients while slicing enormous heads of greens. One younger servant, probably 14 at most, dips a leaf in honey and pops it in her mouth, just to see if it's true. She waits. Nothing happens. And yet, moments later, she's curled under the prep table, snoring like a cat. Or maybe she's faking it, dodging cleanup duty. Still, the belief remained. The ancient physician Dioscorides even categorized lettuce in his medical scrolls. He believed it quenched sexual desire, another reason Roman nobles used it liberally after decadent meals. Not just for sleep, then, but for purity. Cleanse the body, soothe the nerves, and put the brakes on any wild post-banquet behavior. Lettuce. The ultimate anti-flirting food. And while we're on that topic, there's a deeply odd detail floating around old Roman texts. Some suggest that lettuce was used in potions for the recently widowed. The idea was to calm grieving hearts and, other urges by feeding them leafy greens daily. A literal grief salad. Healing via fiber. Historians still debate whether this was genuine medical practice or just one of those bizarre traditions that got exaggerated by generations of bored scribes. After all, most Roman doctors doubled as philosophers, and their cures tended to blur the line between logic and superstition. You hear a faint clink now. Metal against ceramic. Someone's cleaning up the last dishes. The banquet has faded entirely. All that's left are echoes and lettuce stems. A soft breeze moves through the villa's portico, brushing over your limbs like the fingers of a well-trained massage slave. You're not hungry anymore. You're not really awake, either. You think, lazily, of how ridiculous it is that a humble vegetable became such a symbol of class, control, and cosmic balance. But then again, what else could it have been? It was cheap, easy to grow, deeply Roman in its duality, alive and lifeless, bitter and soothing, part medicine, part myth. You let out a small exhale, and for a second, it sounds like the sigh of an old senator content after a long oration. He probably had lettuce with his speech, too. You imagine one final toast whispered across the candle-lit room. To the gods, to the table, and to lettuce, may it always silence our minds. And then silence. Now the scene goes quiet. Not silent in that heavy, alarming way, but soft and fading, like the hush that follows the last sip of wine, or the moment just before sleep fully claims you. Your fingers rest lightly on the stone tabletop, still cool despite the embers dying in the brazier nearby. The room is empty now. Just you, and the ghosts of a dozen well-fed Romans all slowly melting into the night. There's no more action to follow. No more servants fussing over roast dormice. No more poets reciting epic lines about lettuce-induced virtue. No more patricians loosening their belts and swearing they'll never eat again. Until the next feast, of course. You take one last walk through the triclinium, your sandals soft against the tile. Past reclining couches still indented by wealthy backsides. Past the bowls of sauce slowly congealing in the lamplight. Somewhere, a forgotten oil lamp flickers. The wick curls like a sleepy eyelash, barely holding on. You smile, because now, in your half-asleep mind, everything seems to make perfect sense. The lettuce wasn't just a side dish. It was a ritual, an anchor, a breath between bites, a palate cleanser not just for the mouth, but for the ego. After all, this was Rome. Excess was expected, but even indulgence needed rules. And lettuce, of all things, was the secret code. It opened the meal, cleared the senses, and later, long after the peacocks and pastries and roasted flamingos, gently swept away the chaos like a culinary lullaby. Not that everyone loved it. Some Roman writers mocked the idea. Who needs a salad to tell them it's bedtime? They'd scoff. But those same men were often the first to nap face down in their garum bowls, knocked out by their third helping of mulsum. So maybe it wasn't about lettuce being miraculous. Maybe it was just the Roman way of saying, we've had enough. Enough talking, enough flexing, enough trying to outwit each other with obscure Greek quotes. You picture it. A slightly drunk nobleman, waving off the server with a weak, lettuce-laced burp and mumbling, "That's it, that's the peak. It's a weirdly dignified finish, don't you think?" And then there's the deeper symbolism. Because Rome, being Rome, never let a good leaf go unphilosophized. In some philosophical circles, the lettuce came to represent humility, simplicity, a quiet return to balance. After the rich sauces and game meats, the tongue craved clarity. The mind did too. You trail your fingers across a mosaic depicting Bacchus himself, eyes twinkling, one foot in a wine jug. Even the god of wild parties would have nodded in approval at the final touch of lettuce. But it wasn't all seriousness. There was play, too. You imagine servants sneaking bites of leftover greens in the kitchen, trying to guess which leaf would knock them out first. Children daring each other to eat the weirdest-looking stalk. Some poor cook insisting his special vinegar-laced dressing was guaranteed to induce the dreamiest sleep in Latium. Historians still argue whether these lettuce rituals were universally practiced, or mostly a trend among the Roman elite. There's scattered evidence of regional variations. Some homes favored herbs like endive or purslane instead, while others swore by boiled cabbage and honey. Still, lettuce remained the default, the baseline. It was grown in the emperor's gardens, praised by the emperors themselves. Augustus claimed he was cured of a dangerous illness by lettuce. Tiberius, cranky and famously sour-faced, had it shipped in during the winter months. One story claims he threw a fit when his personal lettuce supply wilted on the road. We've all been there. Lettuce rage is real. Now you're reclining again, this time on a real bed, or maybe still on that imaginary marble bench under a fig tree. It's hard to tell. The world has gotten soft, blurred around the edges. Even the torchlight seems to hum, and just before your thoughts drift entirely into dream territory, you pause to appreciate how deeply, strangely comforting this whole journey has been. From seed to feast, from myth to medicine, from the streets of Rome to your pillow. Lettuce carried the story, one leaf at a time. You don't need a lecture on digestion or a sleep manual written by a toga-wearing physician. You just need this: a cool room, a fading candle, a gentle tale about a green, crunchy little helper that once held the mighty Roman appetite in check. And now, dear listener, as the last bowl is scraped clean and the final wine cup drained, it's time for you to let go too. So now sink a little deeper. You've walked through banquet halls and wandered the kitchen gardens of emperors. You've listened to poets muse over salad leaves and watched wealthy matrons arrange lettuce on silver platters like it was fine jewelry. You've tasted honeyed vinaigrettes, dodged vinegar debates, and even floated somewhere near prophetic dreams, fueled by overly bold bites. And here, in this final moment, there is no more fact to chew on, no debate to ponder, just the soft breath of night around you, the weight of blankets, the hush of everything slowing down. The room is cooler now, like the inside of a Roman villa at dawn, shutters gently clicking in the breeze. You imagine the scent of crushed mint and olive oil still lingering in the air. Maybe the soft rustle of someone folding a linen napkin. Maybe not. Your body feels heavier, but not in a bad way. Like marble warmed by sunlight. Like bread rising in a quiet oven. You've listened. You've wandered. You've feasted. And now, it's time to rest. Let that lettuce work its ancient, possibly exaggerated magic. Let your mind slow to a leaf's pace. Let the last image be a silver bowl, gently tipping, as a final green leaf floats down onto the table and comes to rest. You're safe. You're still. You're already drifting. Good night.